Chapter 385. The one who spoke was Narcissus, one of the 5 martial magisters. He pointed at the Umla basin and said, "Let me greet them first." With a wave of his hand, countless flaming clouds formed in the sky. Half a minute later, over 100 huge flaming meteors descended from the sky. Each of the meteors was the size of a truck, and there were layers of lava spreading on them. It was as if the end of the world had arrived, and the meteors fell toward the Umla basin before them. Each meteor would cause a tremor when it hit the ground. The scattered rocks and lava were like a rain of death, completely killing all life in the vicinity. Under the attack of the high temperature, more than 1/3 of the Umla basin began to burn fiercely, and it began to burn toward the rest of the forest. If there were no accidents, the entire forest in the Umla basin would be completely scorched in a few hours. When they saw the martial magister's meteor shower falling from the sky and easily turning the entire Umla basin into a scorched land, the millions of soldiers all cheered. Everyone was sincerely proud of the power of the martial magisters on their side. The roars of over 1 million people almost shook the clouds in the sky. However, the 5 martial magus didn't react to these sounds. Only Michelle frowned and said, "Right now, the entire basin is burning. How do you expect our people to enter? You still want to send people in?" Narcissus said with disdain, "My improved meteor shower can even melt steel. Those silver demons should have been burned long ago. We'll go to Hell's Gate after the fire is extinguished." "Not necessarily." Hearing Narcissus' words, Sibelius shook his head and said, "These silver demons are very resistant to high temperature and fire. Your fire might not be able to burn them all to death." At this moment, a series of explosions suddenly occurred in the Umla basin. Those were the high explosive mines that Tony and Fong Haojia had set up in the forest, but now they had self-detonated in the meteor shower. Narcissus was puzzled. "What's with this explosion? My meteor shower shouldn't have this ability, and I don't feel any magic waves. Is there something in the basin?" Sibelius explained, "It's the silver demons doing. They seem to be able to create explosions without using magic. Raven's explosion also didn't have any magic waves. Anyway, the silver demons are not all dead yet." Michelle flipped her hair and said, "Then let me put out the fire so that the army can attack later." As she spoke, a huge amount of mana gushed out of her body. The ubiquitous vacuum zero-point energy in the void, which was what mages called magical elements, gathered in the sky, and after a series of reactions, the energy gathered in the sky. After a series of reactions, it turned into a large dark cloud and appeared in the sky above the Umla basin. The next moment, there was a thunderous roar, and a torrential downpour fell from the sky, drenching the lava, meteorites, and flames in the Umla basin. This was not just extinguishing the fire of the fire. The water droplets that fell from the sky turned into steam at a temperature of hundreds of degrees before they even reached the ground. White steam instantly filled the entire Umla basin. The lethality of the steam was even greater than that of the previous fire. The lava and flames were easier to resist because they could be seen and touched, but the white steam was all-pervasive. It would sweep across the entire Umla basin like a disinfectant, killing every living thing in it. When the fire clouds in the sky began to gather, Tony, Fong Haojia, Ivan, and Brian, who were hiding in the forest, had already noticed that something was wrong. Tony was still looking at the huge stone pillars that suddenly rose into the sky from the enemy's camp. Now, he raised his head and looked at the fire clouds that were gathering above his head. He recalled the magic information that he had read during the training. His expression changed, and he was already shouting into the communication channel in the nano armor. "It's magic. It's a meteor shower." However, the meteor shower before them covered a large area. It almost covered half of the Umla basin. The attack range was far beyond what was described in the magic information. This power, is it from the martial magus? When Tony, Ivan, and the others were chased by those mages before, it wasn't that they hadn't encountered a sorcerer before. However, when they encountered those sorcerers, They hadn't even made a move before Jin Guang finished them off in a few moves. Therefore, although they had always known that sorcerers were very powerful, even stronger than level 5 ability users in some aspects, they had never really taken it to heart. Now, however, the enemy's martial magus had already launched a large-scale attack. Its power was even greater than that of level 5 ability users. While Tony was thinking about this, the meteor shower had already begun to fall from the sky. Tony and the others didn't care about the small rocks mixed in the meteor shower. However, when they saw the 100 or so meteors, each of which was the size of a truck and had lava flowing out of them, their expressions changed immediately. The enemy is too strong. Abandon the fortifications. Everyone, break through to the north. The power of the magician Marshall far exceeded that of the archmages that Tony and the others had encountered before. The meteor shower in front of them was enough to destroy a town in an instant. If the truck-sized meteors hit them head-on, apart from Feng Haojia, who had the ability to turn invisible, the others would undoubtedly die. Even with the nanotechnology armor, there was no guarantee that they would survive. No one wanted to test the power of this magic. After hearing Tony's roar through the communication channel, Ivan and the others immediately ran towards the north, wanting to break through the encirclement. Along the way, the four of them relied on their strong bodies and the occasional warning from the nanosuit to dodge the meteors falling from the sky, finally leaving the area covered by the magic. Even the most arrogant of the four, Ivan's eyes flashed with a hint of lingering fear. Was it the martial magus who made the move? The nanosuit covering his head and the chip covering his eyes contracted. Like a telescope, it allowed him to clearly see the 5 martial magus standing on the stone pillars more than 10 li away. Seeing this, the expressions of the four changed. They didn't expect the enemy to directly make the martial magus take action, and the power of the martial magus far exceeded their expectations. Looking at the burning forest several hundred meters away, as well as the distorted air and the lava that exploded from the meteors, Tony said with a grim expression, "The difference in power is too great. Let's retreat." The other four nodded as well. If the enemy had only attacked with ordinary soldiers and mages, they could still rely on the heavy weapons in the warehouse to defend. However, the enemy had made the move with the power of the martial magus. It was no longer something they could fight against. Although the four of them were a little unwilling to give up the world crossing gate, they had no other choice. However, just as the four of them entered stealth mode at the same time and broke through the edge of the Umla Basin, the fiery clouds in the sky disappeared, and a large patch of dark clouds came shrouding over them. A few seconds later, a heavy downpour came from the sky, falling into the Umla Basin. The white steam was like some kind of poisonous smoke, quickly shrouding the entire Umla Basin. The high-temperature alarm kept ringing out from the nanosuit. The steam formed by the lava and the rainwater was enough to kill an ordinary person in an instant. Although Tony and the others were wearing nanosuit, it was impossible for them to withstand such high temperatures indefinitely. Moreover, the omnipresent steam would not only threaten their lives, but it would also expose their bodies, which were already invisible. "Damn it, let's go." After Tony finished speaking, he took a step forward. The powerful explosive force was once again magnified through the exoskeleton joints at his ankles and knees. His entire body was like a sharp sword, piercing through the surrounding water vapor as he charged toward the north. On the stone pillar, the 5 martial magus quietly looked at the Umla Basin, which had turned into a hell of death. If this was an ordinary war, they would have left by now and returned to their own laboratories to continue their research on magic. However, this battle was personally ordered by the son of the demigod, Adam. Not only did they want to completely wipe out the silver demons, but they also wanted to seize the Hell's Gate. This would be a vanguard for the Allied army's counterattack on Hell. Therefore, not only did the 5 of them not leave, but they also watched the battlefield seriously. At this moment, although Tony and the others' movements were very small and they were still invisible, they were still discovered by the 5 martial magus. They stood at the top of the Mondo continent. Regardless of whether it was destructive power, insight, survivability, or other aspects, they were all far superior to Tony and the others. To them, Tony and the others were like rats in a hole that had been doused with water and had just escaped. Sibelius said, "The environment in the Umla Basin is too harsh now. Ordinary armies can't enter. Let's have the Golden Imperial Guards take action and capture these rats." The other four martial magus had no objections to Sibelius's arrangement. They couldn't go into the Umla Basin to catch the rats themselves. After all, they were the martial magus, responsible for leading the allied army. They could just stand there and cast spells and give orders. It would be too degrading to let them fight the beasts. Seeing that the other four didn't say anything, Sibelius directly gave the order through the wind message spell. After receiving the order, the gold guardians under the stone pillars all raised their heads. Sibelius's vision was directly transmitted to their minds. The terrain and current situation of the Umla Basin, as well as the location of Tony and the others, were all memorized by them. A bloodthirsty light flashed in the eyes of the magic warriors. In the next moment, the Golden Guards were divided into 5 groups. They stood together in groups of 5, forming 500 small teams. They cast magic together. Magical elements rose from the bottom of their feet. In the next moment, the 5 warriors clad in golden armor had soared into the sky like jets, directly passing through the rainwater and water vapor that were still clashing against each other in the sky. They were heading straight towards Tony and the other 4. When the 5 gold guardians soared through the sky, a large number of shouts rang out in the military camp again. Before they even got close, each of them had already unsheathed a golden dagger from their backs. By the time they arrived at their destination, countless detection spells were cast. Even though Tony and the others were still in their optical camouflage mode, they had nowhere to hide before the 500 golden knights. Boom! The first 5 gold guardians to arrive directly rushed towards Ivan. Ivan roared and turned into a giant wolf that walked upright. His 2 claws fiercely pounced on 2 gold guardians. With 2 bangs, the gold guardians who were attacked were directly sent flying. However, unlike the opponents who were smashed into pieces in the past, the gold guardians' bodies and bones were far stronger than Ivan expected. They just fell to the ground, shook their heads, and stood up again. They looked unscathed. In the hands of the other gold guardians, blue electric light emerged from their golden short swords. In order to deal with the silver demons this time, their magic swords were specially enchanted with electric magic. At first, there were 2 gold guardians, then 5, 10, and 20. The gold guardians were like cockroaches that couldn't be killed. No matter how they were torn apart by the sharp claws or sent flying, they couldn't be killed. One after another, they rushed towards Ivan. As more and more electric attacks hit Ivan's nano armor, he couldn't help but cry out in pain. His body couldn't help but tremble under the stimulation of the electric current. Chapter 386. Countless soldiers surged toward the Amara Basin like a tsunami. After being buffed with countless buffs, every one of them was like a champion in the 100-meter dash. Their fanatical belief in magic surged into their hearts, causing them to charge forward without regard for anything else. Because almost all of the forest had been burned down, the entire Amara Basin was now in front of them. Victor held a long sword and ran forward with his captain. As a member of the vanguard, he could see at a glance countless demons on the ground several miles away, eyeing them covetously. These demons all had silver-white scales, which made Victor's eyes flash with a trace of greed. Like him, his companions had already begun to think about how to peel off the skin of these silver demons and exchange the silver on their bodies for money. But before Victor could react, he heard a series of soft sounds in his ears. His companions fell one after another. Then he felt a pain in his chest, as if his whole body was being torn apart by something. The next moment, he blacked out and lost consciousness. The soldiers standing at the back were even more at a loss. They had no idea what kind of attack they were under. They could only vaguely hear crackling sounds coming from the silver demons opposite them, and the people on their side fell and rose like wheat. Some of their bodies were directly torn apart, and some had bloody holes on their bodies. It was as if some invisible attack was targeting them. A captain reacted and shouted, "Be careful. Those silver demons can turn invisible." The surrounding soldiers immediately stopped in their tracks. They played with the weapons in their hands, as if they were cutting a group of invisible ghosts. Some of the smarter ones grabbed the sand under their feet and wanted to sprinkle it on the invisible silver demons, but it did not have any effect at all. No matter how the soldiers attacked, they could not find the so-called invisible enemies. Instead, the enemies' attacks became more and more dull. Under the attack of the Gauss rifle array, these medieval magic soldiers were like a group of farmers who came out of the mountains. They did not have the slightest resistance and fell in rows, leaving a large number of corpses on the ground. The two sides exchanged fire for only a few minutes, and tens of thousands of soldiers of the Allied army had fallen. The soldiers who used the Gauss rifle even had to withdraw because the barrel of the rifle overheated. However, some of the mages on the Allied army's side finally reacted. It's the silver demons on the opposite side. They are shooting metal particles that are hard to see with the naked eye at a very fast speed. Gather the soldiers. Mages use magic to block the attack. Through communication and some telepathic magic, the command of the entire Allied army was like an extension of one's arm. When the order was given, the soldiers in the front row shrank their formation and huddled together. In front of them were huge stones made of magic. The stones were as hard as steel in front of the soldiers, and they were pushed forward by them. At first, the Earth's army tried to directly shoot the stones directly with their rifles, but they soon gave up. Although they could break the stones, the mages could quickly make them again. Seeing the enemy stopped shooting, the soldiers in the front row of the Allied army soldiers. "Kill them all. Drive them back to hell." However, as soon as their shouts began, an even more terrifying and sharp sound rang out, suppressing all of their shouts. Accompanied by this sound was a series of terrifying vibrations. It was as if the entire earth was quaking. A captain looked up at the sky. For some reason, when he heard this sound, he felt a sense of danger in his heart, but he couldn't figure out where this danger came from. But in the next moment, he witnessed what the danger was with his own eyes. A 152 millimeters high-explosive bullet flew to a position 10 meters away from him. Accompanied by a loud bang, high temperature and sharp shrapnel flew in all directions. The shock wave mixed with the shrapnel directly blew the soldiers within 40 to 50 meters into pieces. The place where the captain stood had become part of a huge crater. The power of this high-explosive bullet, with the armor-shattering effect, was far beyond the imagination of the Allied soldiers. The most important thing was that these things were all mass-produced. Just beside the realm-crossing gate, a total of more than 80 heavy artillery that had been urgently transferred were roaring wildly. Steel and gunpowder turned into flowers of death that bloomed all over the Allied army's camp. The dense formation that was used to withstand the Gauss rifles became the best target at this moment. In addition to the high-explosive bullets, there were also incendiary bullets that could produce a temperature of more than 2,500 degrees. These incendiary bullets were mainly composed of iron tetroxide, aluminum powder, and magnesium powder. Even water couldn't put them out. However, the enemy obviously didn't know this. Some mages tried to use water to put out the fire, but under such a huge heat, the water would become an accelerant. The hydrogen produced would only increase the fire on the soldiers. Even if they jumped into the water, they couldn't put out the fire. Instead, they would be boiled alive by the boiling water. In addition, there were armor-piercing bullets, electromagnetic cannons, and plasma cannons specially prepared for the mages. The defensive force field of ordinary mages couldn't withstand such terrifying high-tech weapons. Any electromagnetic cannon or plasma cannon could blast them into pieces or vaporize them into ionic states. The entire battlefield seemed to have become a huge oven. Even the air became hot. Many soldiers who hadn't been killed by the cannons began to melt from the inside because of the hot air inhaling. The mages used defensive force fields, fire barriers, and teleportation over and over again. However, the advantages brought by technology and systematization were vividly displayed on the battlefield at this moment. The cannons bloomed endlessly in the Allied army's camp. In just over 10 minutes, most of the mage apprentices, inferior mages, and even superior mages had entered the embarrassing state of magic exhaustion. On the other hand, the Earth Army, which was right next to the teleportation gate and the teleportation gate, would not hesitate to bombard the enemy for more than 10 minutes, even if it was more than 10 hours or 10 days. Not even a corpse would be left behind. In the first battle between the two worlds, the Allied army of magic fell into a desperate situation because of their lack of understanding of Earth's weapons. If they had used spatial magic to approach the Allied army from the beginning, or used a small number of sorcerers to sneak attack the armored troops, their chances of winning would have been much higher. However, they chose to directly confront the enemy's steel lions with their army. In the eyes of the soldiers, countless demonic beasts from hell let out earth-shattering roars. Their mouths could spit out demonic flames that could never be extinguished. These demonic flames fell from the sky, and even the mages found it difficult to resist. When the Allied army left more than 200,000 corpses on the battlefield, the great magician marshals on the high platform finally could not hold it in anymore. This was not the situation they had imagined. However, although the power of these demons' weapons was beyond their imagination and surprised them, the 5 great magician marshals never thought that their side would lose. Magic was eternal. This thought had long been ingrained in them. Moreover, each of them believed that although the demons' weapons were sharp, they still could not hurt them. You've all made a move. Let me do it this time. Leviathan slowly walked to the edge of the high platform and put his palms together. Accompanied by the sound of an incantation, he pointed out a finger, and a dazzling white light shot out from his fingertip, landing in the camp of the Earth's allied forces. The terrifying white light brought about an astonishingly low temperature. The terrifying cold air instantly spread in all directions. The low temperature of more than minus 230 degrees Celsius directly turned the warriors wearing nano-armor into ice cubes. The heavy cannons that were firing at the rear were also not spared. They were specifically targeted by Leviathan. 1/3 of the heavy cannons were covered by the cold air and turned into ice sculptures. Chapter 387. More than 90 sorcerer-level mages, every one of them having a comprehensive ability close to a level 5 ability user. In particular, they knew a wide variety of magic, many of which included spatial gates, vaporized forms, illusions, necromancy, and so on, making the Earth Army's ability user troops retreat step by step after the battle. This was the first battle between the two armies of unfamiliar civilizations. Although Earth's general staff had already made many battle plans through Jonah's intelligence, when they truly faced these sorcerers, they discovered that they were more troublesome than they had imagined. Almost every sorcerer had 3 to 5 ways to escape and save their own lives. As for the ability users, apart from those with powerful defense and survivability, the rest could only rely on nano-armor to protect themselves. Necromancer there opened his mouth, invisible sound waves coming out from his mouth. He had already used a level 9 necromancy spell, Banshee's Howl. The sound that seemed to come from the underworld directly pierced through the heads of the surrounding soldiers. Even the nano-armor was completely unable to defend against the mental and physical attacks. All the ability users affected by the Banshee's howl fell to the ground in an instant, no longer breathing. Just this howl alone caused the deaths of dozens of ability users. These ability users simply had no way to defend against this type of attack magic. However, the instant Dar's howl was halfway through. An electromagnetic ability user grabbed an armor-piercing bullet in his hand and aimed it at his head. With a bang, Dar's head exploded without any resistance, and his headless corpse weakly kneeled on the ground. However, in the underground cave several kilometers away, the necromancy clone was activated. The prepared backup body already opened its eyes and accepted Dar's soul. He let out a roar, broke out of the ground, and charged into the battlefield once again. However, just as he charged out of the ground, he was completely submerged in the plasma that fell from the sky. Not to mention him, Even the ground beneath his feet directly melted into liquid under this high temperature of over 10,000 degrees. As the battle became more and more intense, the artillery batteries at the rear of the Earth Army were taken over from the portal one after another, and then they were assembled. Over 200 heavy cannons of various colors took in and spat out high explosive bullets, armor-piercing bullets, incendiary bullets, electromagnetic cannons, plasma cannons, and fuel air bombs one after another. In order to deal with the magic that was impossible to guard against, the Earth Army even began to bombard the entire Basin indiscriminately as cannons were brought out one after another. A general looked at the blazing battlefield and shouted into his walkie-talkie, "Hurry up and kill these savages. Wipe out the entire basin in front of us from a map." In the entire battlefield, the only place that was not hit by artillery fire was right in front of the Earth's army, where the ability users and sorcerers were engaged in close combat. This was the only place where the allied magic army had the upper hand. Once they broke through the defense of the aptitude users, they would be able to march straight in, and the long-range cannons would not be able to do anything to them. An ice mage breathed out a freezing mist that was over 100 meters long, turning countless ability users into ice sculptures. However, before he could heave a sigh of relief, an ability user shot out laser beams from his eyes and sliced him in half. However, when this ability user aimed his gaze at another sorcerer, the laser beams that he shot out seemed to have pierced through an illusion. Then, a shadow covered the top of his head, and a huge steel puppet stomped down, stomping the ability user into the ground. Then, with a wild roar, an ability user whose entire body was covered in steel rushed up, knocking the huge steel puppet over with brute force. Then, he jumped up, and under the guidance of the nanotechnology armor, he smashed down fiercely at the position where the heat of the puppet was the strongest. However, his surroundings were soon covered by the densely packed souls of the dead. These souls of the dead with the incorporeal physique ignored his steel defense and nanotechnology armor and directly drilled into his body, injecting endless negative energy into his body. Another mage took advantage of his weakened state to use the spell of human charm. The eyes of this ability user who had turned his entire body into steel flashed with a green light, and he roared and rushed toward his comrades, bringing with him a rain of blood. As more and more people joined the battle became more and more tragic. On the other hand, although there were many ability users on Earth, they were always at a disadvantage. It was under such circumstances that, by Xingha asked Xiao Laikong and the others to come over and support the ability users. Xiao Laikong was the first to arrive at the scene. His entire body was surrounded by layers of storms and electric currents. After receiving personal guidance from Li Onping and the knowledge of reaching the 6th energy level from the Queen of Heaven, his combat power was no longer what it used to be. Although he had not reached the 6th energy level yet, he felt that he might be able to take that step at any time. Looking at the increasingly intense battle before him, Xiao Yekong's body transformed. The high-intensity electrons seemed to have been assimilated into irritable spirits, and a terrifyingly high temperature swept out in all directions. His body had completely turned into a plasma storm, and he pounced toward the battlefield. It was just like the liquefied body that Li Onping had seen in Jade City. However, the plasma storm that Xiao Laikong had turned into now was much closer to the ability user's essence, and its power was also many times stronger. Wherever he passed by, there was no need for him to make any attacks. He only needed to pounce on those sorcerers, and whatever defensive force field or magical barriers, they would all be torn to shreds by the plasma storm. He was just like the god of destruction, constantly bringing death and destruction. On the other side, Emma and Woody, who had joined the battle at the same time, were not as ferocious. Emma relied on her unpredictable spatial gates and dimensional slash to kill 4 sorcerers consecutively. Woody had drawn the number to transform into a defensive state. He simply focused on covering those injured ability users and helping them retreat. He left all the work of charging and breaking through the enemy's lines to Xiao Laikong. After Xiao Yekong's body turned into a plasma storm, it continued to expand. In the blink of an eye, it was already the size of a train carriage, and it continued to expand. Wherever it passed by, all the sorcerers, except for those who used magic to dodge, were all turned into ashes. For a moment, most of the remaining mages turned their attention to the plasma storm, and Xia Laikong absorbed almost half of the firepower by himself. At the same time, the psychic clone behind the spatial gate was quietly observing the movements of the entire battlefield. Regardless of whether it was the death of ordinary soldiers, the sacrifice of ability users, or the power of Earth's heavy firepower, his expression did not change at all. It was because he was waiting. He was waiting for the opponent's demigod to make a move, waiting for the opponent's remaining trump card. Li Onping's actual body was still in outer space, which was tens of millions of kilometers away from the magic planet, while the opponent's demigod had already left through the spatial gate. However, although his actual body was far away from the battlefield, due to the battle with Dionysus, he had finally taken a new step forward. Long before the battle started, his body had finally taken the step of the reorganization of his consciousness. Feeling the extraordinary feeling in his body, it was as if there were countless pieces of information being input into his brain at every moment, and then it was constantly being analyzed, summarized, and summarized. The information regarding the battlefield was only a small part of it. What will you choose? Suddenly, Li Onping's attention was focused on the battle between ability users. The next moment, his body in outer space flashed and then disappeared completely. Just as Li Onping was focusing his attention on the battle between ability users, Xia Yekong's plasma body had been attacked by at least hundreds of high-level magic spells. Some of them had no effect at all, but some of them could even cause damage to his plasma body. The information was received by the psychic energy clone and then transmitted to Li Onping's brain. Countless formulas flashed through Li Onping's mind. It only took 0.1 seconds for him to know that Xia Laikong alone would not be able to withstand the opponent's sorcerer army. However, just as he was wondering if he should let the psychic energy clone make a move, 2 rays of light, one golden and one black, had already cut across the sky like 2 meteors, flying toward the battle between ability users. Golden light and Yanbei, very good. Li Onping knew that with golden light, who had already reached the 5th energy level, Yanbei, Xia Laikong, Emma, and Woody, as well as the remaining ability users, they would be able to completely suppress the sorcerer army. In terms of the overall situation on the battlefield, Earth had already won. It was only a matter of time before the sorcerer army was completely wiped out. On the battlefield, under the fierce bombardment of countless cannons, the enemy soldiers did not even have the strength to fight back. In a short period of time, the enemy had already lost more than 300,000 soldiers. It was simply faster than harvesting wheat. In this battle, other than the possible appearance of a demigod, the only remaining uncertain factor, or rather, the only hope for the enemy to turn the situation around, were the 5 martial magicians. Although there were only 5 of them, each of their abilities was above a level 5 ability user. Some of them were even close to level 6 ability users. Due to the variety of magic spells they had, their overall abilities were stronger than level 6 ability users. Even when the psychic energy clone made a move personally, it could not kill them in one blow. This showed how powerful their abilities were. If it wasn't for Li Onping, the expeditionary force on Earth might not have been able to defeat them with just these 5 great magician marshals. Just as Li Onping's attention was focused on the 5 martial magicians, his expression did not change at all. However, the psychic energy clone took a step forward, crossed the portal, and looked at where the 5 of them were. The psychic energy clone had finally arrived on this magic land. What was the reason that allowed him to temporarily not guard the world crossing gate and come to this battlefield? Chapter 388. 5 minutes before Li Onping's psychic clone stepped out of the teleportation portal. After Bai Xinghe stepped out of Emma's teleportation portal, he appeared in mid-air. As Emma had used her naked eyes to determine the location of this teleportation portal, she chose to be in mid-air to prevent any accidents from happening. Otherwise, if the portal was stuck in the mountains or in the soil, It would be very troublesome for the people who rushed out. Bai Xinghe looked down. Several hundred meters below him, he could see the high platform that had been shattered by Li Anping's palm strike. There were also countless soldiers who had collapsed on the ground, as well as Sibelius, who was half squatting on the ground and slowly standing up. A sinister smile appeared on Bai Xinghe's lips. He opened his palms slightly, and the original sword of 10 arms, which was shining with a demonic purple light, slowly extended from his palm. It was as if his elbow was a scabbard. He slowly pulled out the sword of 10 arms from his palm. This was because the sword of 10 arms was originally created by the psychic energy of countless experts in the divine territory. After Bai Xinghe completely understood the sword of 10 arms and grasped it, he gained the ability to store the sword of 10 arms into his body. Just as he descended from the sky and was about to land on the ground, a strong gust of wind blew toward him, blowing his hair high into the air. The nanotechnology armor had automatically completed its replication, enveloping his entire body, including his head. Under the guidance of thermal imaging and sonar detection, the positions of the 5 great magician marshals were marked out one by one. The sword of 10 arms in his hand slashed out, leaving behind a series of purple afterimages. Bai Xinghe let out a low roar, and a hurricane swept up around him. He left behind a series of afterimages as he fell towards Sibelius, who was the closest to him, like a meteor. After Xia Likong obtained the Empress Enlightenment, he already possessed strength close to the 6th level. Then, after obtaining this enlightenment, just how powerful would Bai Xinghe, who is already the strongest among level 5 ability users, become? Before Bai Xinghe even got close to Sibelius, the sword of 10 arms had already slashed towards Sibelius from a distance, bringing along several hundred times the gravity and raging psychic energy. At the same time he slashed out, there were 9 parts of his body that were like 9 suns, erupting with astonishing power. Different from the overwhelming aura of the Prajna palm, Bai Xinghe's saber seemed to have snuck into the night with the wind. There was no sound at all. However, the world in front of his eyes had already undergone shocking changes because of Bai Xinghe's attack. First of all, the clouds in the sky were directly cut in half by this slash. The huge gully between the clouds extended to tens of kilometers away. The sky was split in half by this saber. So what about the land? Beneath Sibelius's feet, a slender knife mark passed through between his feet. It extended to a distance that was difficult to see with the naked eye. Wherever the knife mark passed, everything on it, be it buildings, walls, trees, or rocks, was cut in half. The smooth surface was like a marble floor. Sibelius, who was the main target of this slash, touched his forehead and felt a wet liquid. His body had more than 100 defensive spells, and his skin was as hard as diamond. However, Bai Xinghe's attack still left a wound that was more than 3 inches long. Blood trickled out from the wound. Looking at the blood on his wound, a hint of anger flashed across Sibelius's eyes. He looked at the silver demon descending from the sky and punched out. A terrifying pillar of fire shot out from his fist. With a temperature that could melt steel, it swallowed Bai Xinghe whole. Countless magic arrays were carved on Sibelius's body. Some of these magic arrays could extract magical elements. Some could help him detect enemies. And there were also all kinds of destructive spells, healing spells, and defensive spells. Sibelius had almost turned himself into a magical war machine. However, when he punched out and the magic arrays on his fist released the Flame Impact spell, the high-temperature Flame Impact spell did not seem to have any effect on the silver demon before him. No, not only did it not have any effect, it had the opposite effect. Sibelius could feel that there were 9 unusual spots on his opponent's body from head to toe. They were like 9 black holes, crazily devouring all the energy around them. Even Sibelius' Flame Impact spell was a target. The flames were disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the end, they turned into 9 small flames that burrowed into Bai Xinghe's shoulders, chest, stomach, and back. It was as if the 9 spots were connected to a door in another dimension. This was the first time Sibelius had encountered such a situation. While he was still in shock, Bai Xinghe had already slashed his saber at his shoulder. Sparks flew everywhere, but only a hair-thin wound was left on Sibelius' shoulder. He immediately reacted and retaliated with his fists. However, Bai Xinghe was like a fish in the water, shuttling around Sibelius freely. Compared to Bai Xinghe's close-range combat skills, Sibelius's skills paled in comparison. This was also related to the environment of the two worlds. The Mondo continent had magic, so the close combat skills of ordinary people were not valued at all. Their development was also very mediocre. Meanwhile, Bai Xinghe had been practicing secret martial arts since he was young. Secret martial arts were invented to counter ability users' attacks against demons. Although Sibelius had modified his body and practiced many of the Mondo continent's combat skills in order to unleash the strength and speed of his modified body, he obviously could not compare to Bai Xinghe. Bai Xinghe held the sword of Tatsuka in his hand and kept circling Sibelius. Although Sibelius was fast and strong, he was like a clumsy elephant. He kept smashing huge holes in the ruins around him, but he could not hurt Bai Xinghe at all. At the same time, he also cast destructive spells on his body. Every time these ice, fire, and electric attacks landed on Bai Xinghe's body, they were directly absorbed into Bai Xinghe's body. Feeling the waves of energy coming from the 9 apertures in his body, Bai Xinghe felt a sense of satisfaction. The 9 fully open apertures were like 9 unknown black holes. Not only was he fighting, but they were also absorbing heat, light, kinetic energy, electromagnetic waves, radiation, and other powers around him at all times. Even the spells that Sibelius cast were no exception. These powers were absorbed into the 9 apertures and then released into his body bit by bit, continuously increasing his body's toughness. Ever since he learned the method of condensing apertures 2 months ago, Bai Xinghe could feel himself getting stronger at every moment. This feeling was almost unstoppable. After cultivating the 9 apertures, he immediately understood that this was definitely a different power system from the ancient system. It was even different from the entire superpower system. However, it was just as powerful and even more systematic. After combining it with the Queen of Heaven's understanding of the 6th energy level, Bai Xinghe improved the cultivation method of the apertures to be more suitable for himself. This caused his body to continuously advance in a non-human direction. Finally, he stepped into the so-called 6th energy level. As for Sibelius, after Bai Xinghe's small test, it was like a cat playing with a mouse. Bai Xinghe kept leaving small wounds on Sibelius's body. Just as Sibelius gradually fell into a disadvantageous position, the other 4 martial magicians finally recovered from the attacks of their psychic incarnations. Blazing Star Brilliance. Narcissus was the first to attack. Terrifying heat instantly engulfed Bai Xinghe. It was like a planet exploding. Crazy energy kept surging out in all directions with Bai Xinghe as the center. However, Narcissus forcefully controlled the energy and repeatedly destroyed the space around Bai Xinghe. It was as if he wanted to completely destroy Bai Xinghe. The energy and high temperature that could destroy an entire city were forcefully concentrated into a space the size of a person. Narcissus, who had used this spell, kept sweating. However, Sibelius, who was at the side, used the telepathic connection and shouted in the hearts of the 4 martial magicians, "Ordinary destructive spells are useless. He can absorb the power of magical elements." As if to complement Sibelius' words, the high temperature turned into tongues of fire that kept circling around Bai Xinghe. In the end, they were all absorbed into the 9 apertures in his body. At the same time, the 4 martial magicians also reacted and stopped their destructive spells. Isa snorted coldly, and one of his arms exploded. Endless aura of death surged out, and a black door opened up behind Bai Xinghe. Countless arms of the undead surged out and grabbed at Bai Xinghe. The aura of death was like a poison, bringing everything that came into contact with it into a deep slumber. The other 3 sorcerers also used different methods. Michelle opened her mouth, and an energy-absorbing rainbow rose from Bai Xinghe's body and entered her mouth. Leviathan and Narcissus were left. One of them used the Great Disjunction spell to turn Bai Xinghe into the most basic atoms. Narcissus pointed a finger to the sky, and a dazzling meteor fell from the sky, rushing toward Bai Xinghe's position. It was not a real meteor, but another spell that Narcissus was famous for, Phantom Meteor. It could attack the opponent's consciousness with a powerful destructive aura. Seeing the four of them using their killer moves, Bai Xinghe frowned. Even he would not be able to withstand the attacks of the four of them at the same time. However, just as he was about to use his speed and secret martial arts to dodge the attacks, his surroundings and body suddenly became half black and half white. It was as if a part of the sunlight had suddenly been devoured. From the shadows on his body, countless two-dimensional, paper-cut shadows suddenly rushed out and were about to bind his body completely. Bai Xinghe's expression changed. Such shadow attacks were already very troublesome. Now that they chose to attack him at this critical moment, the situation in front of him became even more tricky. The aura of death had almost completely enveloped him. Hundreds of arms of the undead were only a few inches away from his back. The energy-absorbing rainbow carried the energy in his body and surged toward Michel incessantly. The Great Disjunction spell was temporarily blocked by his mental power. The Phantom Meteor, on the other hand, was flying toward his forehead inch by inch with unparalleled pressure. In the crowd of soldiers nearby, Night Beast, who was disguised as an ordinary soldier, was working together with Mephisto. Night Beast controlled the darkness, and Mephisto restrained Bai Xinghe in the light and shadow with the help of the darkness. When Mephisto's Country of Shadows and Night Beast's ability to create darkness worked together, their power was more than doubled. Bai Xinghe had been able to resist the 5 sorcerer generals, but the sudden appearance of Night Beast and Mephisto had brought him into a fatal crisis. However, at the critical moment, 5 minutes had passed. It meant that his mental power clone had walked out of the portal and arrived on the continent of Mondo. He took a step forward and teleported himself to Bai Xinghe, who was more than 10 kilometers away, at an astonishing speed. Seeing him, the 5 sorcerer generals, Night Beast, and Mephisto all changed their expressions at the same time. Chapter 389. The 7 enemies present, be it the 5 martial sorcerers or the 2 level 5 ability users, could not see clearly what the psychic avatar was doing at this moment. Only Bai Xinghe, who had the strongest physical body, could vaguely see the psychic avatar's body and arms drawing lines in the air as it attacked the enemies present. The enemies, on the other hand, could not see anything at all. Everything was because the psychic avatar's speed was simply too fast. Therefore, they could not see the process at all. The only information they could receive was the result. In less than 0.1 seconds after the Ninja clone appeared, Narcissus felt a sharp pain in his chest. An extremely terrifying force had exploded his chest, including his internal organs, spine, and rib cage. Like a baseball, he was sent flying more than 10 kilometers in the direction behind him. While he was still in midair, due to his severe injuries, he had completed his elementization with a flash of fire and was spared from death. The Phantom Meteor that was in the middle of casting dissipated automatically. The second person to be attacked was Michel. Other than the psychic avatar and Bai Xinghe, no one else could tell the order of the attacks. The psychic avatar's finger gently tapped on Michel's head. The protective force field and magic barrier outside her body shattered instantly. The protective force field that could withstand the attack of a fuel-air explosive directly shattered like a piece of glass in front of the psychic avatar's finger. The next moment, this exotic beauty with wheat-colored skin exploded from head to toe like a firecracker. The psychic avatar's action was like crushing an ant to death. However, after Michel's body exploded, her entire body suddenly disappeared, leaving only a broken rag doll on the spot. It was a top-grade magic instrument, the Death Substitution Puppet. Michel, who had survived, had already appeared more than 100 meters away after the Death Substitution Puppet was activated. Her face was still in shock. However, the expression on her face was also permanently fixed on the state of shock. On the martial sorcerer's forehead, a bloody hole the size of an index finger was slowly oozing out blood. To Li Onping, the death substitution puppet was just an ant that was not crushed to death in one go. The third person to be attacked was Isa. The psychic avatar's finger was like the sharpest sword in the world. With a swipe of the finger, it cut through all the defensive barriers on his body and created a huge hole in his body. The spell, Undead Cloning, was activated. Thousands of kilometers away, the backup body that Isa had prepared in advance suddenly opened its eyes. Its eyes were still filled with fear that could not be wiped away. The power of the King of Devils was far beyond his imagination. The fourth person to be attacked was Leviathan. The psychic avatar sensed that Isa used some kind of spell to escape the attack. This time, the attack on Leviathan was not as casual as before. The unlucky Leviathan's head was bitten off by the psychic energy incarnation, and his soul was absorbed in an instant. He did not even have the time to cast an escape spell of God's avatar. Leviathan was killed. It was only then that Sibelius managed to take a step forward. He wanted to besiege the King of Devils with the others. However, he realized that the only sorcerers left were him and Narcissus, who had turned into a ball of flames and was slowly recuperating in the ruins a few kilometers away. Although Isa was fine as well, he had been chased back to his laboratory and was scared out of his wits by Li Onping's finger. How is this possible? He looked at the psychic avatar in a daze. It was hard to imagine that a race that did not possess any magical powers could have such a powerful individual. We can't let such a monster live. Facing Sibelius, who seemed to have been scared out of his wits, the psychic avatar slammed him into the rock strata that were thousands of meters underground. It was as if it had hit a nail. In less than a second, the 5 martial sorcerers, who had been so arrogant earlier, were either injured or crippled. The attack that had besieged by Xinghe was also completely disintegrated. In fact, if it had not been for the fact that they had to guard the dimensional portal and prevent the demigod Dionysus from launching a sneak attack, Li Onping's psychic avatar alone would have been enough to end this battle. But this is good too. It means that I've trained my troops before the demons. The next moment, the psychic avatar looked at Night Beast and Mephisto. Do you think you've won? Night Beast suddenly laughed eerily. From a moment you left the dimensional portal, you've already lost. The next moment, countless shadow blades pierced out from under the psychic avatar's feet and bound his body. Mephisto had already activated the Country of Shadows technique, Fixed Image. The psychic avatar's body froze in an instant. Perhaps in the next moment, he could kill Mephisto with laser cannons, positron cannons, or other means and break free from Mephisto's shadow bindings. However, at the very least, his body would not be able to move at all. At the same time, the remaining 2 martial magicians cast a teleportation spell at the same time and appeared in front of the psychic avatar again. A huge magic array suddenly appeared on the ground under the psychic avatar's feet. The same thought flashed through their minds at the same time. Fortunately, Lord Adam was prepared. Otherwise, the allied army would definitely be wiped out this time. The next moment, the 2 martial magicians' magic power was channeled into the magic array continuously. The huge magic power torrent turned into a huge pale hand and grabbed at the psychic avatar directly. The confinement array was an ultimate spell that required more than 30 sorcerers to cast. It had been lost long ago in the era of the ancient magic empire. Legend had it that the ancient magicians had created this spell to fight against each other. Adam had discovered it and taught it to the 5 martial magicians. He had also drawn the array here in advance. Although the casting time was slightly longer and required more preparation, and it could only be used on the objects in the array, it could ignore all the other party's magic resistance and was immune to all abilities. This still gave it endless power. This was because this spell purely used the torrent of magic elements to suppress and confine the other party. How much magic elements were there? Fighting against this spell was like fighting against the entire world. The series of methods used by the other party was to temporarily confine the psychic avatar here before the 2 martial magicians ran out of magic power. The next moment, The purple sword of 10 strikes had already pierced through the psychic avatar's chest. A terrifying suction force was transmitted from the sword. Even the psychic avatar, who had been confined by the confinement array, did not show any signs of surprise. However, at this moment, his expression changed. Sensing that the psychic avatar was losing psychic avatar, he turned to look at Bai Xinghe. However, he did not say a single word, nor did he ask why. He merely shook his head and said in disappointment, "You've chosen a path of death." Bai Xinghe said calmly, "We'll only know after we try. It's better than being under you for the rest of our lives." "That's right." Night Beast grinned hideously and said to Bai Xinghe, "Well done. When this is over, we'll give you the rest of the acupoint condensation method." Lianping threw a cold glance at them and said, "If I want to leave, you won't be able to stop me. Do you really think that I'll be reluctant to part with these several tens of thousands of soldiers? I'm sorry, but I'm afraid you won't be able to leave." Dong Er's figure slowly walked out from the ruins. She was still holding a white, long sword in her hand. She looked at Lianping, whose psychic avatar was being absorbed by the sword of 10 strikes, and said, "This avatar of yours was formed from psychic avatar to begin with. The sword of 10 strikes is your natural nemesis. Moreover, we've added in the latest spatial sealing technology. The fastest speed in the universe is the speed of light. The only way to exceed the speed of light is to let matter not carry any mass or information. In this way, it can exceed the speed of light without violating the theory of relativity. The method your avatar used to return is based on this theory. However, even you don't know how he knew about it, right?" Donger smiled coldly and said, "Your psychic avatar is unable to return now. Then, after it is absorbed by the sword of 10 strikes, what will happen to your original body? A robot?" Lianping frowned as he looked at Dong. Her body was completely visible to him. It was a body that was completely formed from metal. It was no wonder that he had not noticed her earlier. Night Beast, who was on the other side, was already laughing out loud. His eyes were filled with elation. "Lianping, today is the day we take revenge for our chief and the other brothers in the League of Stars. From today onward, you'll become the strongest sword in Little Tian's hands. Use your power to help him bring benefits to the entire human race." So that's how it is. Bai Xinghe was in danger because he wanted to lure me out? What a simple scheme. However, the sword of 10 strikes is still unable to absorb me. The psychic avatar's expression still did not change. It was as if there was nothing in this world that could make him lose his composure. If he continues to absorb me like this, he'll only explode. Night Beast smiled and said, "It's a simple scheme, but you still fell for it. Lianping, every step you take is within Little Tian's calculations. There's no way you can win against him." "It's true that the sword of 10 strikes alone is not enough," Donger said with a sweet smile. "However, with this holy sword, it might not be the case." She tossed Cardenas, the holy sword in her hand, to Bai Xinghe. The latter grabbed the holy sword and stabbed it into the body of the psychic avatar again, following the sword of 10 strikes. The 200 ultimate swords overlapped with each other. The sword of 10 strikes, which was completely made of psychic avatar, slowly seeped into the white holy sword. Cardenas represents the strongest power in the Mondo continent. His sword contains a huge half-plane, which is enough to bear any enormous power. All the power of the psychic avatar will be inherited by this new weapon, and your original body will suffer irreversible damage. Under such circumstances, I think Dionysus will be very interested in you. While Donger was explaining, the body of the psychic avatar became fainter and fainter. In the end, it slowly dissipated in the air. Night Beast said with a trembling voice, Has it finally succeeded?" Everyone else did not hate Lianping as much. However, when they saw the brand new white holy sword in Lianping's hand, they still revealed traces of shock, greed, and relief. It was as if a huge rock in their hearts had finally been lifted. However, Bai Xinghe looked at the holy sword in his hand and did not seem to care. He said to Night Beast, "The sword that you want is here. Where's the thing that I want?" Dongo had already stepped forward. "Just give me the sword." Night Beast stepped in front of her and said, "This sword must be handed over to Tion personally." On the other side, Mephisto and the two martial magicians, who had used up most of their magic power, revealed traces of greed in their eyes. Donger smiled and said, "Shang Tian is so timid. He doesn't even dare to come here personally. Do we have to wait for him here? A long delay may lead to trouble. Let me take care of it first." Night Beast said coldly, "Who said that Tian didn't come?" Just as Night Beast finished speaking, a pitch-black portal suddenly opened beside them, and Adam and Kadia walked out from it. Ignoring everyone present, he looked at the holy sword in Li Onping's hand with a fascinated expression. He waved his hand and said, "Mephisto, go and inform Dionysus. Tell him that Li Onping has been seriously injured. I think he will be very interested in hunting him down." Mephisto stared at the holy sword in Bai Xinghe's hand. Then he looked at Shang Tian and Kadia, who was beside him. A trace of struggle flashed in his eyes, but he eventually left slowly. He walked towards Bai Xinghe step by step and said enthusiastically, "Welcome. From now on, Earth belongs to you, and Mundo belongs to me. As for Li Onping, he has naturally been sacrificed in this war." Adam took out a book from his pocket and threw it to Bai Xinghe. "Then, can you give me the sword?" A trace of hesitation flashed in Dong Er's eyes. However, after looking at Kadia, who was vaguely standing in front of her, she did not do anything in the end. Bai Xinghe opened the book and took a look. He nodded and said, "There are indeed a total of 720 apertures." Just as Shang Tian felt that Bai Xinghe's words were a little strange, Bai Xinghe had already thrown the holy sword in his hand to him. He did not have time to think too much. He could not wait to use the magician's hand to grab the holy sword. Only when the sword was really in his hand did he reveal a trace of relief and excitement on his face. "Li Onping, this is just the beginning." Looking at the holy sword in his hand, a trace of hatred flashed in his eyes. He murmured, "This is just the beginning." At this moment, his expression suddenly changed. Looking at the holy sword in his hand, he blurted out, "No, this sword." At the same time, the entire sky suddenly darkened, as if it had turned from day to night. No, it was not that the sky had darkened. Instead, a dazzling light shot directly from the sky. Because the light was so dazzling, it gave people the illusion that the sky had darkened. This ray of light directly landed in front of Adam. Under everyone's incredulous gazes, Li Onping's figure slowly appeared within this ray of light. However, instead of saying that he appeared, it was more like a part of the light had turned into his body. Impossible. You should still be tens of millions of kilometers away. How could you appear here? Shang Tian said in disbelief. However, the next moment, he found that his body could no longer move at all. He could only watch as Li Onping slowly picked up the holy sword in his hand, which he regarded as a treasure. It was not only him. Everyone present looked at Li Onping in the light pillar. It did not move at all. An aura that was completely irresistible pressed down on them. It was as if they would immediately die if they moved even a little. Interesting. Looking at the holy sword in his hand, Li Onping said indifferently. The next moment, the entire sword shattered, turning into countless particles that were hard to see with the naked eye. They mixed with the Nianqi clone and were absorbed into Li Onping's body. Not only did the Nianqi clone dissipate completely, the gravitational force that the Sword of 10 Arms had absorbed was also completely absorbed by Li Onping. Countless data and formulas flashed in his mind. So that's how it is. At this moment, the four forces in the universe, gravitational force, electromagnetic force, strong force, and weak force, were completely unified by Li Onping. With a gentle wave of his hand, the Sword of 10 Arms returned to its original state. Tossing the sword to Li Onping said, "Kill all those sorcerers." "Yes, your majesty." Bai Xinghe nodded and shattered the secret manual in his hand. On his body, the power of a total of 720 aperture points rose. The number of aperture points that he had condensed was far more than the 9 that Shang Tian had given him. Bai Xinghe did not even look at Shang Tian and the others. With a leap, He flew toward the direction of the battlefield. Shang Tian looked at Li Yonping with a ferocious expression. The hatred in his eyes seemed to contain an irreconcilable hatred. "You lied to me?" Li Yonping nodded and said, "Yes." Then he grabbed Shang Tian's head. "Let me take a look at what's going on with you." The coldness in Li Yonping's tone made Shang Tian break out in cold sweat. Chapter 390. When Li Yonping pressed his palm on Shang Tian's head, countless information flashed through his eyes. After Li Yonping's consciousness was reorganized, his entire brain, or rather his consciousness, was operating in a state that was completely different from a human's. He had entered the third stage of the power system that he had created, which was quantum computing. A human's brain, or rather, consciousness, was something that was very similar to a computer. If the original Li Yonping's computing power was comparable to the most advanced supercomputers on Earth, then the current Li Yonping's computing power was comparable to that of the most advanced supercomputers on Earth. But now, after a part of his brain had been reorganized, he was able to operate his brain according to quantum theory. It did not turn his brain into a quantized state and become a superposition of countless possibilities. Instead, it changed the most fundamental mechanism of the brain or consciousness. He had completely changed his consciousness algorithm, causing Li Yonping's brain to evolve once again. In the past, Li Yonping's brain was more like a traditional computer, but now his brain had become a quantum computer. It was like an ordinary computer was based on a binary system. It was a combination of 0 and 1, and they could form all the information in the world. Regardless of whether it was the oldest electronic tube computer or the latest VLSI computer, their essence was the same. They all used a language that was composed of 0 and 1. Therefore, theoretically speaking, the world's first computer could do everything that a modern computer could do. It was just that the time it took to do it would be an astronomical figure. But now Li Yonping had become an existence similar to a quantum computer. His input and output had all become superposition states. If he were to be compared with a traditional computer, then he would record the superposition of 1 and 0. For example, if a traditional computer recorded a 10-digit binary number, the same 10-digit number would be 2 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 in a quantum computer. Every number was a superposition of 0 and 1. With each additional number, the processing speed would increase exponentially. Li Yonping's brain was like this now. In the past, no matter how strong his brain's computing power was, there were so many quanta in the real world. With each increase, the computing requirements would increase exponentially. It was difficult for his brain to calculate and simulate many quantum phenomena. But now his consciousness algorithm had been changed by quantum coding. Through actual quantum processes, he simulated physical phenomena. What he recorded was not the phenomenon after the superposition, but the superposition itself. He can calculate everything he needs to calculate through parallel computation. The so-called measurements, units, and even numbers were all meaningless in his brain. In Li Yonping's brain, the input and output were all the eigenstates of a certain mechanical quantity, a superposition of various possibilities. What he recorded was 1 and also 0. He could calculate all possibilities at the same time, and when he needed to get a realistic result, he could use any unitary transformation to get a realistic result. At this moment, the secrets of the universe became unprecedentedly rare in front of Li Yonping. As long as any physical phenomenon appeared in front of Li Yonping, it would be instantly analyzed. The information storage capacity of an ordinary person's brain was about 10 carat 8,432 bytes. This meant that Li Yonping could process more than 2 to the power of 10 carat 8,432 bytes. This was an astronomical number. The number of particles in the entire universe was about 10 to the power of 80 to the power of 10 to the power of 80. The above was an imaginary number. The information storage capacity of the brain had not been determined. In any case, it was an extremely large number. This was the foundation of the third stage of quantum computing, allowing the brain to perform calculations using quantum processes. This allowed Li Onping's computing power to experience an explosive increase like the Big Bang. Almost as soon as he reached this stage, Li Onping had already analyzed the following path of this stage, as well as what the fourth stage of this power system of his was. The beginning of the third stage was to liberate his brain, and the end was to liberate his entire body. This allowed his entire body to simulate the quantum process itself. If his brain could operate at 2 to the power of 10 carat 8,432 times the normal speed, then his body could also operate at 2 to the power of 10 carat 8,432 times the normal speed. The former was equivalent to 2 to the power of 10 carat 8432 Li Onping thinking, while the latter was equivalent to 2 to the power of 10 carat 8432 Li Onping fighting. Of course, the above was just a rough estimate. In any case, after Li Onping's body was liberated, the power he possessed would be an astronomical number. This number itself might even be infinite. Li Onping only spent 1 minute to calculate over 100,000 possibilities for the fourth stage of this power system. He picked out the 3 most superior ones and named them quantum immortality, universe tree, and superstring life. However, he would have to wait until he had completely completed the third stage before deciding which one he would choose. Ever since he had taken the step of quantum computing, Li Onping's brain had been carrying out countless calculations almost all the time. This kind of parallel calculation was like an instinct to him. It was as if there were countless of him hiding in his mind, helping him calculate everything in this world. However, he was still himself. Li Onping grabbed Shang Tian, and countless memories of Shang Tian flowed through his mind. If it was said that the stage of quantum computing would eventually bestow him with almost unlimited computing power, after grasping gravity, electromagnetic force, strong interaction force, and weak interaction force, Li Onping could theoretically simulate all the physical phenomena in this universe. Of course, theory was only theory. Even if the universe itself was unable to create an Earth in 1 second, Li Onping would not be able to do so either. Time, space, and energy were still the restrictions that restricted him. Unless he could make another breakthrough and complete the third stage, the fourth stage, or even the fifth stage, to the currently Onping, reading a human's memories was as easy as breathing. It was not as difficult as flipping through the newspapers in front of a newsstand. Every electrical signal and chemical change in the other party's brain was clearly displayed in front of his eyes and analyzed in an instant. In Li Onping's eyes, it was as if a movie was rewinding rapidly. If it was not for the fact that Shang Tian's brain was too weak for him, he would be able to finish reading all the pitiful data in less than a second. Of course, the amount of data stored in any human's brain was pitifully little to the current Li Onping. Shang Tian, whose head was grabbed by Li Onping, started to struggle crazily. Li Onping, Shang Tian's words were like a torrent of hatred that could not be washed away even by the entire world. Shang Tian's eyes were almost emitting a blood-red glow, and the muscles on his face were squeezed together. His expression was so ferocious that he was like a wild beast that was struggling on its deathbed. Although Shang Tian's body was restrained by layers of force fields, his consciousness was still being read by Li Onping and was not restrained. Shang Tian roared furiously. After his body had been modified, countless nanoworms helped him swallow all kinds of magic elements. A colorful torrent of magic power appeared between his eyebrows and blasted toward Li Onping like a light cannon. This was one of the ultimate forbidden spells of the ancient magic empire, the magic light cannon of creation. When Shang Tian was in the cloud courtyard, he had used countless treasures collected by Dionysus and treasures from various countries, together with the nanoworms in his body to adjust the subtle changes in his body. The magic power in his body had accumulated to the level of a martial magician. In addition to the fact that he was already familiar with countless magic techniques, his personal strength was no less than that of the 5 martials magician. Just as he launched the magic light cannon of creation that could destroy a mountain range, the 10 rings on his fingers emitted all kinds of lights at the same time. Some of them were Dionysus treasures, and some of them were excavated from some ruins and battlefields according to Shang Tian's memories. They were all magic devices, and almost every one of them could be regarded as a family heirloom by the Mage Alliance on the continent of Mondo. Now, they were all activated by Shang Tian at the same time. All kinds of spells that were like unparalleled flame and ultimate explosion were released at the same time, vowing to blow the irreconcilable enemy before him into pieces. At the same time, the shadow robe that originally belonged to Dionysus was also activated. The surging negative energy turned into fatal spells, such as Finger of Death, Banshee's Howl, and Command of Death. They all surged toward Lianping. However, in front of Shang Tian, whose eyes were red like a gambler who had lost a bet, Lianping's eyes did not change at all. He simply slapped Shang Tian's head, as if he were a high school student bullying a junior from a junior high school. Be quiet. In an instant, the magic light cannon of creation, unparalleled flame, ultimate explosion, and Finger of Death were all turned into nothingness by Lianping's slap. This was because at this moment, all the magical elements around Lianping, or rather, the vacuum null energy, were all dispersed by him. Just like how he extracted the energy from the void, Lianping reversed the process and returned all the magical elements to the void. He was like how they were constantly disappearing and reappearing in the void. This slap, which was like a gangster bullying his underling, also dispelled the resistance of everyone present. Dong, Mephistopheles, Night Beast, and Kudiak all looked at Lianping in disbelief, especially the remaining two martial magicians. Their understanding of magical elements was much higher than that of the previous few. Now, their mouths were wide open, and they looked at Lianping as if they were looking at a ghost. Shang Tian's body was trembling, and his eyes were wide open as if they were dripping blood. However, there was nothing he could do. His physical body had been completely imprisoned by Lianping. It was as if he had been stripped naked and served on a plate, allowing Lin Li to read his memories. This caused the grief and indignation in his heart to reach the extreme at this moment. Lianping, you and I cannot live under the same sky. Lianping naturally did not care about him. He was only slowly reading Shang Tian's memories at a speed that would not hurt him. Everything that Shang Tian had experienced was displayed in front of him, as if he was watching a movie. From the ambush outside, the Umla Basin, to the various plans in the Cloud Courtyard, as well as the meeting with the leaders and the excavation of the ruins. As the camera rewound, Shang Tian was modified, massacred the villagers, entered the world-crossing gate, and set off from a base in the north of the Law Nation. Every memory was replayed so clearly in front of Lianping's eyes. Lianping could even feel every twitch of Shang Tian's muscles in these memories, every beat of his heart, every memory of his body, every vision, hearing, smell, and touch were all replayed before Lianping's eyes without reservation, until in the base in the north of the Law Nation, Shang Tian slowly opened his eyes. He who was only 2 or 3 years old slowly crawled out of a glass container naked. Then, no matter how Lianping tried to read, he was unable to read Shang Tian's memories before he entered this container. This brain before me doesn't store any memories from before he entered the container at all. Or perhaps his memories started from the moment he opened his eyes in the container. Chapter 391. Shang Tian's memories started from the base in the north of the Codex Nation. After leaving the base, he entered the portal and started his journey on the Mondo continent. Apart from that, his brain also stored many possibilities for the future, as well as many secrets about the Mondo continent, as well as the magic knowledge of the Mondo continent. However, he seemed to be used to it. Lianping took a look and found that Shang Tian's brain seemed to have been tampered with. Shang Tian's brain would operate according to predetermined rules, and he would not think about the blank memories of the past. He would only subconsciously ignore them. Clone? Cyborg? Lianping looked at Shang Tian with neither pity nor disdain in his eyes. It was as if he was looking at an ordinary commodity. However, Lianping's words stunned Shang Tian. Li Onping continued, "You don't have any memories of your past?" Shang Tian's eyes suddenly became empty. This was a question that he had subconsciously ignored. After Li Onping brought it up, it finally made him think. My past. Shang Tian only remembered that he had passed through the world crossing gate and arrived at the Mondo continent. He wanted to use his advantage of knowing a lot of information in advance and the power of the demigod Dionysus to eliminate Li Onping and end Li Onping's evil. But it shouldn't be like this. Where's my past? Why can't I remember it at all? Seeing that Shang Tian was motionless and seemed to be on the verge of breaking down, Li Onping did not look at him anymore. He walked past him and arrived in front of the others in a flash. After reading their memories one by one, he found that only Mephisto and the two great magician marshals were not in such a situation. In Mephisto's memory, ever since Tyrell and the King of Gods reached an agreement, the entire palace had become strange. Even he, the leader of the Annihilation Abyss, could not enter as he wished. Later on, he even issued the outrageous order of closing the country to the outside world. Mephisto and the other level 5 ability users of the Annihilation Abyss were all secretly implanted with nanobugs. These bugs hid in their blood and brains, threatening their lives at any time. Afterwards, they joined Shang Tian's group under the orders of the royal family and followed him to the Mondo continent. After reading Mephisto's memories, Li Onping's eyes emitted a green light, as if he was scanning Mephisto's body. In an instant, the nanoworms in Mephisto's body were hacked by Li Onping. Under Li Onping's control, the nanoworms crawled out of Mephisto's body and landed on Li Onping's palm. Li Onping looked at the nanoworms gathered in his palm and didn't say anything. He had already analyzed the relevant technology. The nanoworms were instantly reduced to ashes. Looking at the excited Mephisto, Li Onping said, "I'll give you 2 choices. Join me or die now." Feeling the power restraining him disappear, Mephisto immediately knelt down and said loudly, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for not killing me." With the power that Li Onping had displayed, it was as if he had a leg that couldn't be any thicker. Moreover, Mephisto was under duress, so how could he not kowtow? As for the others, Shang Tian, Night Beast, Kadia, and Dong Er's bodies seemed to have spontaneously combusted with a thought from Li Onping. Accompanied by a wave of scarlet flames, they were turned into ashes. Li Onping, who had unified the 4 fundamental forces, could simulate almost all physical phenomena in the universe. With just a thought, he could burn a flame with a temperature of tens of thousands of degrees, but it didn't affect the surroundings at all. To him, it was as easy as moving his fingers. Of the 4 people who had died, the first 3 were just artificial humans that had been implanted with special memories. Although Dong was a robot, according to Li Onping's search, there wasn't much information in her memory. However, there was some data regarding the Divine King and the Red Queen that piqued his interest. Following this, Li Onping turned his gaze toward the remaining 2 martial sorcerers and said calmly, "The same goes for the 2 of you. Join me or die." Narcissus opened his mouth and shouted, "Don't even think about making me surrender, Lord Dionysus." Before he could finish speaking, his entire body was disintegrated into countless atoms that couldn't be seen by the naked eye, and the energy in his body returned to void space. When Sibelius saw this scene, his body trembled and cold sweat trickled down his forehead. He hadn't expected that Li Onping wouldn't give them any leeway at all. He didn't even give them a chance to bargain before he disposed of Narcissus like trash. Unlike Narcissus, who had a fiery temperament, although Sibelius' fighting style was very violent, his personality was closer to that of ancient mages, rational, cold, and knowledgeable. Faced with Li Onping's choice of life or death, he didn't spend too much time making a decision. He glanced at Mephistopheles, who was kneeling on the ground. He sighed in his heart, but he still knelt down and said to Li Onping, "I'm willing to serve you." Good. As he spoke, he had already transmitted his orders to everyone's communication devices on the battlefield. Prepare to stop the attack. Sorcerers Sibelius, who have surrendered, come and take over the remaining soldiers. Anyone who resists will be executed on the spot. After giving these orders, Li Onping got Sibelius and Mephistopheles to rush to the battlefield and left the remaining matters to Bai Xinghe. As for himself, he had already stepped into the portal eagerly, turned into a beam of light, and disappeared before everyone's eyes. Bai Xinghe asked through the communication device, "Your Majesty, are you not going to care about the magic planet anymore? I'll leave everything to you guys. Unless a demigod appears, you don't have to report to me." Li Onping's tone revealed a rare hint of excitement. Bai Xinghe seemed to have also sensed this hint of excitement. He asked hesitantly, "What are your plans?" "First, get rid of some cockroaches. Then, I'll go and change the entire world." Countless blueprints seemed to have appeared in Li Onping's mind. With the power that he possessed now, the words changing the world were not an exaggeration at all. He had too many things that he wanted to do, and he wanted to do them. Having reached the third stage of quantum computing, he was no longer worried about the threat of the demons. Even if he could not fight against the demonic gods, he had sufficient means to avoid them. Compared to the strategy to conquer the magic planet, it was obvious that changing the world was more exciting for him. Moreover, Li Onping, who had completed the recombination of matter, was now able to transform into light and travel at the speed of light. That was a speed of 300,000 kilometers per second. In less than a second, he would be able to travel between Earth, the land of white, and the magic planet. As long as he discovered traces of Dionysus, he would be able to rush over immediately. At the same time, just as the first battle on the magic planet came to an end on the land of white, a spaceship that was completely covered in white was flying into the distance at a speed of more than Mach 10. Inside the spaceship, a little boy of 2 or 3 years old was holding a glass of fruit juice and drinking in boredom. Beside him was Night Beast, who had a worried expression on his face, and Kadia, who was wearing a set of bells and had an impatient expression on his face. The reason for their impatience was that the spaceship's main hall was far too noisy. In front of the three of them, over 10 men of different ages, body shapes, hairstyles, and clothes were making a ruckus. The only similarity was that their faces looked a little like Shang Tian's. No, excluding the difference in age and dressing, their faces were exactly the same. A middle-aged Shang Tian, who looked to be in his 30s and had a cigarette in his hand, shouted, "Number 0 seems to be dead. What a useless piece of trash." On the other side, an 18-year-old Shang Tian, who was dressed in a training suit, said in a muffled voice, "This means that Li Onping has already reached the level of quantum computing. It seems that it's only a matter of time before he attains quantum immortality. The evil demons are no longer a threat. The key to everything is Li Onping." This time, the one who spoke was a white-haired Shang Tian, who looked very old and wore a Taoist priest's robe. He mumbled, "We can't let him choose any other path. We must let him become the heavenly Tao. Only then can he be used by us, by humans." "What do you mean by becoming the heavenly Tao? Is that so?" A Shang Tian, who was wearing a combat suit and had a cross-shaped scar on his face, and both his arms were made of metal, said casually, "Anyway, even if he has endless computing abilities, it's impossible for him to really see through the timeline. Everything just has to go according to the plan." Another Shang Tian, who was in his teens and had a shaved head and wore a mage's long robe, turned his head and looked at the 2-year-old Shang Tian, who was drinking fruit juice. He said, "In short, we can't go against him. As long as he takes the initiative to become the root of all humans, wiping out all feelings and emotions, he'll be able to turn harm into benefit. He'll become the most powerful force for us and all humans. In this case, he'll be considered dead. We'll be considered to have taken our revenge, and he'll be considered to have completed his dream. It'll be the best of both worlds." Another Shang Tian, who was only the size of a thumb and looked like a little elf, chattered away. "But what about the Red Queen? Are we just going to leave them on Earth? Even if they see us uploading them onto the internet, with Li Onping's current computing abilities, it's only a matter of time before he'll hack them. We've gotten them to help us so much this time around. They won't leak too much information, right?" Looking at the over 10 Shang Tians who were getting increasingly agitated as they spoke, A hint of frustration flashed in the eyes of Shang Tian, who was only 2 or 3 years old. He waved his hand and shouted, "So annoying." At the next moment, all of the Shang Tians disappeared, leaving behind only Shang Tian, who was not even 3 years old. He continued to sit on his seat and drink his fruit juice. However, his gaze became increasingly cold. Chapter 392. A ray of light pierced through the dark and deep seabed of the frozen ocean. After a thousandth of a second, Li Onping had crossed hundreds of kilometers and appeared above the sea level. Although he couldn't wait to use the power he now possessed to change the entire world, he had to take things one step at a time and complete them one by one. First of all, he had to solve the remaining problems on Earth. That was the person who created or cloned Shang Tian. He felt that this person behind the scenes was a small threat from the information he got from the magic world. In addition, there was also the Red Queen, who created Dawn. That was also something that needed to be caught, so that she wouldn't drag him down when he was at a critical moment. However, according to Li Onping's calculations, these 2 steps required a large-scale search of the entire Earth, which could be done in the next task. Li Onping stood motionless on the sea level. In 3 seconds, he had analyzed all the spells from Shang Tian's mind. In 2 seconds, he had mastered them and was able to break through the barriers and create new spells at will. At the next moment, he raised both of his hands, and deep blue seawater rose from the sea under his feet. However, when the seawater reached the height of his knees, it turned into countless atoms. Then, under Li Onping's modulation, these hydrogen atoms, oxygen atoms, chlorine atoms, and so on had their electronic structures changed and their chemical characteristics reestablished. One by one, they were changed from one element to another element that Li Onping needed, a metal that Li Onping was very familiar with, adamantium. These metal elements continued to rise. When they passed over Li Onping's head, they were combined by him and turned into silver metal nanoworms. The principle of these nanoworms was based on the nanoworms on Mephisto's body. However, these nanoworms were even more terrifying under Li Onping's modification. Made of adamantium, they could survive in any environment. They were constantly transmitting various electric signals in the air. Their backs, abdomens, and tentacles were all engraved with various magic arrays modified by Li Onping, which could extract the vacuum zero-point energy in the surrounding void to help them complete various tasks. Li Onping's computing power was increasing explosively every minute and second. He controlled these nanoworms through electric signals and unique quantum algorithms. As long as he created them, he didn't need any power except to command and control them. These nanoworms slowly drifted in the air with the airflow, and Li Onping was still absorbing the seawater, creating hundreds of millions of nanoworms every minute and second. As time passed, these nanoworms would spread to the whole Earth with the airflow and rain. At that time, each of them would be a signal node. No matter what happened on Earth, it would be transmitted to Li Onping's brain at the speed of light. When these nanoworms spread to every corner of the Earth, the whole Earth would be under Li Onping's surveillance. Li Onping, who had almost unlimited computing power, could process all the data of the whole Earth at the same time. It was still very simple for him now. And that was not all. These nanoworms, which existed like air, would be connected to the prearranged spiritual network, speeding up the construction of the spiritual network and greatly increasing the coverage of the network to make up for the lack of prearrangement. The internet that already existed on Earth would also be connected to the nanoworm network. The whole Earth would become a huge local area network. Anyone, anywhere, would be able to access the network without any barriers. It would also have a network speed that was 100 to 200 times higher than in the past. In other words, while Li Onping was monitoring the whole Earth, he would also be monitoring the whole online world, including all the phone calls, emails, videos, and so on. It's still too slow. With this thought in mind, Li Onping waved his hands. Initially, there was only a small area of seawater under his feet that was rising. However, in the blink of an eye, it expanded to several tens of square kilometers and started to sway. To the naked eye, It was as if the seawater had evaporated into thin air. However, they had all turned into omnipresent nanoworms that were going to cover the whole Earth. While creating the nanowires, Li Onping also connected to Earth's network. Countless numbers of data flowed through his mind. In about a minute, he had already learned all the knowledge he needed to carry out his next plan. This was knowledge that a human might not be able to learn even if they spent several decades, or even centuries learning it. At the same time, his signal was connected to Wang Chong's cell phone. In a conference room in Xia's palace, Wang Chong was reviewing a plan to renovate the city. Beside him, at the huge conference table, other than the representatives of the 9 great royal families, there were also a few upper-class aristocrats from the Federation. They had come here to discuss some issues of the alliance. Just as this group of people was debating over some issues, Wang Chong's cell phone on the table suddenly rang. Wang Chong frowned. He should have switched his cell phone to silent mode for the meeting. Could it be that I forgot to turn off the sound? He picked up his cell phone and was about to end the call when he saw the name displayed on the screen. Li Onping. His hand trembled, and he immediately picked up the call. He said respectfully, "Your Majesty." The 2 words he said seemed to have magical powers. When these 2 words rang out in the conference room, everyone who had been discussing and talking fell silent. They turned their gazes toward Wang Chong, who was seated at the main seat. They even pricked up their ears, wanting to get closer to Wang Chong and hear what the emperor was saying to him. However, it seemed that the volume of the phone was too soft, and they could not hear anything. They could only see Wang Chong nodding incessantly, saying things like, I understand, all right, I understand." His face was occasionally nervous, occasionally frowning deeply, and occasionally revealing an expression of disbelief. No one knew what he had heard from Li Onping. After he hung up the call, he let out a deep breath. Seeing that all the officials present were looking at him curiously, he smiled bitterly and said, "Everyone, we'll have to change the topic for today's meeting." Below the De Xiaolong K base, at the Intelligence Department's supercomputer, there were 5 huge computer screens in front of Momo. He was using his powers to connect to the supercomputer, continuously perfecting the artificial intelligence's algorithm. Ever since Li Onping had assigned him this mission, he had been researching this thing. After such a long time, he finally had some results. On the screen, there was a conversation window where a man and a woman were chatting. The man was someone that Momo had casually found on the internet, while the girl named Luoluo was actually an artificial intelligence program that Momo had created. At the beginning, the 2 of them were still able to chat back and forth. However, after a few minutes, Luoluo seemed to have entered some sort of endless loop and could only keep repeating the same sentence. Just as Momo was feeling disappointed, the screen on the other side flashed, and Li Onping's avatar appeared before Momo's eyes. "Your Majesty," Momo looked at Li Onping, who had suddenly appeared, and said in astonishment. However, Li Onping's expression did not change. He merely looked at the right side of the screen as if he could really see the conversation window on the other screen through the screen. "Is this an artificial intelligence that you developed? Although it's not mature yet, it's only a matter of time. Let me help you perfect the rest." In an instant, data flowed down from the screen like a waterfall. On the screen, thousands of windows opened and closed. The load on the supercomputer instantly increased to 99% and continued to increase. Before Momo could reply to Li Onping, he saw that the program that belonged to artificial intelligence Luoluo was growing rapidly and splitting up continuously. To Li Onping, who was already able to change his consciousness algorithm, it was too easy to write a simple artificial intelligence algorithm. At the next moment, an unfamiliar female voice suddenly rang out from the computer's sound system. "Hello, I'm Earth's #1 artificial intelligence, Luoluo." Momo looked at the computer screen that was still flashing nonstop in a daze. When he heard the voice, he subconsciously asked, "Your Majesty, what do you want?" The one who replied was not Li Onping, but Luoluo. Her second sentence sounded very human-like, unlike the previous sentence which had a flat tone. His Majesty's goal is to liberate the entire human race's productivity. Therefore, when he's not on Earth, artificial intelligence will be used to manage the entire Earth on his behalf. Chapter 393. Just as Luo finished saying this, countless black tentacles appeared out of thin air in the computer room that was originally used to store the supercomputer. They started to dismantle the supercomputer. Seeing this, Momo, who was in front of the screen, immediately stood up and exclaimed, "What are you doing?" This supercomputer was currently ranked #1 in terms of performance in the entire world. It was also Momo's favorite. Now that she saw it being dismantled bit by bit, how could she not be nervous? There was a lot of important data stored in it. Hearing Momo's question, the artificial intelligence in the computer replied, "His Majesty is casting a spell from a distance to change my computer into a quantum computer. It's because ordinary computers are no longer able to meet the current requirements." Hearing this, Momo sat down and mumbled, "Quantum computer?" As a computer expert, she naturally knew what a quantum computer was. It was a computer that was created based on the principle of simulating the quantum processes in a microscopic world. The quantum algorithm could increase the performance exponentially by calculating all possibilities in parallel. It could be said that as long as there was a quantum computer, it would be able to decipher the most difficult encryption measures on Earth within a few seconds. And for a lock created using the quantum encryption method, even if all the computers on Earth were to work together, they would still not be able to decipher it. However, the research and development of a quantum computer was filled with difficulties. Momo had never expected that Li Onping would be able to create one now. While the quantum computer was being created, Li Onping, who was far away on the surface of the frozen ocean, continued to create a tremendous amount of nanoworms. The number of nanoworms increased rapidly. If this were to continue, it would not take a few days for the total number of nanoworms to surpass the total number of microorganisms on Earth. By then, regardless of whether it was the atmosphere, the ground, the mountains, the cities, the seabed, the volcanoes, or even the depths of the Earth's core, the entire Earth would be filled with these nanoworms that Li Onping had created. Not only would they become the best network medium, forming a huge local area network that belonged to Earth, but the electromagnetic waves and gravitational waves that they continuously emitted, as well as the physical operations they performed with their claws and bodies, would also change the entire Earth's environment according to Li Onping's plan. The rain, the breeze, the temperature, and the light would all be carried out according to Li Onping's plan. The originally polluted environment would also be reversed, and all natural environments would burst forth with new vitality. These nanoworms would even permeate the surroundings of everyone, eliminating diseases, slowing down aging, and preventing accidents for every human on Earth. And the vacuum zero-point energy extracted from each of them, after gathering together, could also become a huge temporary energy source. In front of Li Onping, countless nanowires that were originally invisible to the naked eye gathered together. Under the joint construction of Li Onping and the others, a huge instrument stood on the surface of the sea. It continuously absorbed seawater from the surface of the sea, and then went through the same process as Li Onping, releasing the newly created nanoworms from the top of its head. Li Onping nodded when he saw that the machine in front of him was already capable of producing nanowires independently. He looked around and saw that there were already thousands of similar machines standing around, producing nanowires in a frenzy. After about 72 hours, these nanowires will be enough to cover the entire Earth. At the thought of this, Li Onping knew that the work had been completed. With a flash, he turned into a stream of light and instantly appeared at the bottom of the sea. Then he waved his hand gently, and the sand at the bottom of the sea was like a huge mouth, slowly opening up as Li Onping sank. This allowed Li Onping to rapidly descend toward the depths of the Earth's core. After the rock layer he passed through opened up to allow him to pass through, it slowly closed up again. It was like a drop of oil sinking into water. With the help of the nanowires, after Li Onping changed the Earth's environment, his next target was the Earth's core. This place had the most violent power on Earth, and it was also Li Onping's next target for modification. As Li Onping rapidly sank, The surrounding temperature kept on increasing. Then, with a puffed sound, Li Onping passed through the last layer of rock layer and arrived at a sea of flames. This was the outer core, which was mainly formed from liquid iron and nickel. The high temperature of over 6,000 degrees Celsius made it impossible for any living creatures to survive here. However, Li Onping took a quick look and continued to sink. Half a minute later, Li Onping was completely immersed in the fiery liquid metal. What appeared before him was iron and nickel that had turned into a solid state under tremendous pressure. This was the deepest part of the Earth's core, the inner core. What Li Onping needed to do next was to control all the energy released by the entire Earth's core. 4 days later, in Tianjin, Wang Chong stood outside the palace's meeting room, looking at the moon in the sky. Just then, a soft tremor suddenly came from under his feet. A hint of fluctuation flashed in his eyes, and he said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, have you started?" He took one last long look at the moon in the sky and then returned to the meeting room. Over 100 officials stared at him, waiting for him to give orders. Just then, all the screens on Earth flashed at the same time. Regardless of whether it was computers, televisions, mobile phones, tablets, or even LEDs, Li Onping's figure appeared. In the palace, all the officials in the meeting room were staring at Li Onping on the holographic screen. On the streets of the city center, all the pedestrians were looking at Li Onping on the LED screen. On the subway, countless young people who were looking down at their mobile phones suddenly discovered that Li Onping's figure had appeared on their screens. In countless families, women who were watching television suddenly found that the screen had changed and Li Onping's figure had appeared. A girl who was playing a game suddenly cursed. It turned out that the game had changed at a critical moment, and Li Onping's avatar had appeared. At this moment, regardless of whether it was day or night, more than 70% of the people in the world were looking at the screen next to them. They were looking at Li Onping on the screen. Under such circumstances, Li Onping opened his mouth to speak. "Hello, everyone. I am Li Onping, the king of Xia, the leader of the Pan-Continent Alliance. Today, I have something to inform all the humans on Earth. In the next few hours, I will slightly change the environment of Earth. From today onwards, whether it is sunlight, rain, gravity, hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, seasons, temperature, humidity, everything on Earth will be under my control. The entire Earth will become more suitable for the survival of human beings. As for the changes that will come next, there is no need for you to feel uneasy." Every time Li Onping finished a sentence, countless people in every corner of Earth voiced their opposition or approval. However, it was obvious that Earth was not a democratic society at the moment. It was a dictatorship ruled by Li Onping alone. Faced with a human being who could reach the speed of light, whose computational ability was almost infinite, who had unified the 4 fundamental forces, and who had covered the entire Earth with nanoworms, it was obvious that no one on Earth could stop him. In the undersea base in the frozen ocean, all the troops that had gone on an expedition to the magic planets had temporarily retreated. Bai Xinghe, Xiao Laikong, Jin Guang, Yin Bei, and other superior ability users were all standing next to the portal, looking at Li Onping on the screen. Xiao Laikong found it hard to believe. How is it possible? Is what His Majesty said true? Bai Xinghe nodded and said, "Earth's next goal is to become an interstellar fortress that all human beings depend on for their survival. The transmigration gate is a space gate. Its location will not change with the change of Earth's position this time." Lu Feng, who was at the side, asked, "But doesn't the world-crossing gate constantly rotate and revolve with the Earth? Why didn't the world-crossing portal move with the Earth this time?" Bai Xinghe scratched his head and said slowly, "I don't know the specific mechanism either. Anyway, according to His Majesty's calculation, the portal still belongs to space and time, and it will still be restricted by gravity. The Earth's transformation this time will launch the world-crossing gate like a spaceship." Everyone around understood what Bai Xinghe meant literally, but they did not understand what he meant when he put them together. Everyone present found it hard to imagine that something like the realm-crossing gate could be launched. All in all, Xinghe added, "the final result is that Earth will start moving according to His Majesty's will. Passing through the realm gate would throw him into space. This place will be built into a space station, and it will be connected to Earth through the space war portal. In this way, the entire Earth will be removed from the battlefield, and we will be able to attack the land of White and the magic planet at the same time." Right after Xinghe finished speaking, the ground under everyone's feet began to tremble violently. They were not the only ones. Everyone in the world felt the tremors under their feet. It was as if a worldwide earthquake was about to happen. Xiao Laikong said worriedly, "Moving Earth is a very complicated project, isn't it? Will there be any side effects if we act rashly in such a short period of time?" After Xiao Laikong finished speaking, all kinds of earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, and hypotheses of the disintegration of Earth, the reversal of the poles, and the melting of glaciers all appeared in everyone's minds. Even Yin Bei could not help but shiver. He said in a comforting tone, "I don't think so. His Majesty must have thought it through before he started moving." While they were talking, the tremors under their feet gradually eased up. The portal in front of them started to move upward slowly. In the end, with a swoosh, it penetrated through the underwater base and flew toward outer space. Looking at the seawater that kept on flowing out from above, Xinghe shouted, "Fang Yuhuang, seal it!" As Fang Yuhuang's 33 paradises were performed, the seawater that was flowing down suddenly paused and floated above the hole in the base that was swallowed up by the portal. Then, countless engineering robots pounced forward and started to repair the hole in the base. On the moon, Li Anping was floating on top of a ring-shaped mountain, looking at the blue planet before him. Following the changes he made to the gravitational force, the planet slowly changed its orbit. Countless nano-worms were swallowing and spitting out electromagnetic waves and gravitational waves. According to Li Anping's calculations, they were constantly making up for the side effects of changes in gravity, sunlight, and other factors. They were also slowly improving the natural environment of the entire Earth. In the depths of the Earth's core, the entire liquid metal ocean had been enveloped by the device that Li Anping had made using adamantium as the raw material. Countless nano-worms were swimming in it, turning the entire Earth's core into a huge power furnace. The effects they had on the Earth's crust, volcanoes, oceans, and other places were all under Li Anping's control. Every minute and every second, the excess energy was collected into the power station on the surface of his body. At this moment, natural disasters such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions had all become legends. After Li Anping slightly changed the Earth's orbit and threw out the portal, he stopped. This was only the first time he had changed the Earth's position in order to throw out the portal. As the orbit changed, it would be further and further away from the Earth. According to Li Anping's calculations, when the demons arrived, the distance between them would be at least tens of millions of kilometers. However, this was only under the condition that Li Anping would not be controlling the Earth in the future. In fact, by that time, the Earth would have probably become a huge interstellar fortress. The way it operated would definitely not be the way Li Anping changed the gravitational force. At that time, the entire human world should have been reborn according to Li Anping's plan. Okay, next step. Thinking of this, Li Anping's figure flashed and turned into a beam of light. He pierced through the space between the Moon Island and the Earth and returned to the Earth. Chapter 394. Law Country, Death Zone. A white beam of light fell from the sky, cut through most of the sky, and then fell on the ground. Li Anping slowly looked at the endless ruins in front of him, and his body gradually floated up. Since it was ravaged by monsters, and then it was destroyed twice by the aftermath of the battle between Hygrim and Li Anping, it had not developed until now. Obviously, the focus of the Law Country and the Alliance was not here at the moment. Hygrim had been mixed with the spirit body on the magic land, and was absorbed by Li Anping in the body. Because the data in his mind was no longer a secret for Li Anping now, and the endless land in front of him, which had been ravaged by demons and monsters, was also time for them to shine again. The whole earth trembled violently as Li Onping opened his arms. All the buildings, steel, cement, and all the wreckage gradually disintegrated. Countless nanomites, invisible to the naked eye in the air, turned all the wreckage into the most basic particles. The next moment, a golden color appeared under Li Onping's feet. It was a paddy field. This was like a signal. The golden paddy field, centered on Li Onping, expanded rapidly. The entire death zone was like a piece of canvas that had been painted with colors. At first, it was wheat, then barley, wheat, rye, oats. Then it was japonica rice, indica rice, glutinous rice, upland rice, deep rice, corn, sorghum, buckwheat, millet. All kinds of food, starting from Li Onping's feet, began to grow wildly in the death zone as if accelerated hundreds of times. Not only food, but the whole death zone seemed to have become a botanical garden. All kinds of fruits, vegetables, and everything that could be eaten on the earth grew here. Under the modulation of nanomites, they were all optimized and upgraded by Li Onping, endowed with extremely high output and vitality. All kinds of trace elements and water in the earth were directly synthesized by Li Onping. If nanomites were used at the highest efficiency, all the fruits here could even be harvested every 2 days. Li Onping waved his hand again, and 10 giant warp gates appeared in the zone of death, as if they had drilled out from the ground. Hey, did you guys receive the signal? Li Onping directly contacted Anna in the warp center. Yes. Anna nodded and led a group of her subordinates to check the space where Li Onping had instructed them to vacate. She asked, "Where do these doors lead to?" "The granary of the world," Li Onping said calmly. "From today onwards, all humans will no longer have to worry about food." Next, Li Onping notified Wang Chong and asked him to send someone to take over the place temporarily. What he said almost made the profession of farmer disappear from history in the next few months. All humans would be able to buy any food at a super low price. Because of the existence of the warp gate, the cost of food and even the cost of logistics was pitifully low. Other than a few old brands that relied on their reputation, no one was in the food industry anymore. These things would all be done by the engineering robots sent by the government. As for the problem of unemployment, Li Onping had other plans. The financial system of the entire human world would undergo earth-shaking changes. However, this would have to wait until he completed the environmental transformation. A beam of light shot into the sky. Li Onping had disappeared from the zone of death once again. Ice Fortress Straff Snow Mountain. A group of tourists strolled in the scenic area of the Snow Mountain Park. They followed behind the tour guide and observed the fascinating natural scenery. The tour guide was introducing their current location and the situation of the next scenic spot, Holy Maiden Peak. Just then, a child pointed at the cliff and shouted, "Daddy, there's a bird!" Everyone looked over. The tour guide was the first to laugh. "Everyone, you're really lucky. This is a snowbird. It's a first-class protected animal. In the entire Snow Mountain Animal Sanctuary, there are probably no more than 50 of them. It's very rare to see one. Everyone, you could take a picture." Just as everyone raised their cameras and was about to start taking pictures, a scene that stunned them appeared. The tour guide had just said that there were no more than 50 snowbirds in the entire Snow Mountain. Suddenly, over 1,000 snowbirds that looked exactly the same flew out from the valley. They were so shocked that they even forgot to take pictures. Then, hundreds of snow leopards appeared on the opposite cliff. This was also an endangered species. The large-scale appearance of such an endangered species once again caused everyone to cry out in surprise. The snow line that had been rising over the years gradually fell. As the temperature dropped, the entire Straff Snow Mountain seemed to have returned to how it was a few hundred years ago. At about the same time, all the endangered species on Earth began to multiply and appear on a large scale. All kinds of animals that had been overfished and hunted by humans in the past seemed to have revived. One after another, they appeared in the sights of humans. Nanjiang Border, Jadeite City. The city that had always been plagued by air pollution was still shrouded in smog today. A young man was walking on the road with his phone in his hand. He would definitely not have dared to do this 2 or 3 years ago in Jadeite City. However, ever since Li Onping took over to Xia, Tianjin had become the only city in the world with a zero crime rate. The entire Xia had become the country with the lowest crime rate in the world. The phone in the young man's hand was playing the magnificent scene of thousands of snowbirds soaring into the sky from the ice fortress snow mountain. Just as the young man was sighing over the video in front of him, countless people on the street suddenly screamed, What's going on? Look at the sky. Damn, the smog is gone. The young man lifted his head to look at the sky as well. He saw that the smog that had filled his eyes had melted like snow. The sunlight shone directly on Jadeite City. The city that was originally foggy and looked dirty was now completely lit up. At the same time, all the polluted environments on Earth began to return to how they had been in the past. The dark and smelly river became clear again. There were even small fishes that jumped out from the river surface. The ozone layer that had been broken was covered up again. Countless nanoworms patched up the ozone layer as if they were mending clothes. The desert became green again, and the land that had been barren was once again filled with vitality. Under Li Anping's control, the entire Earth's ecological environment began to develop in a direction that was beneficial to human life. It also achieved a dynamic balance according to the population of the entire Earth. In Xia Dragonfinch's base, countless ability users were all crowded in front of their screens, watching the news that was suddenly broadcast on television. A beautiful female host was reporting on the changes in the entire world with a face full of shock. Ever since His Majesty Li Anping announced the plan to transform the entire planet, one incredible thing after another has happened on our planet. According to the calculations of mathematicians and astronomers, our original revolution has been changed. 1 year has become 377 days, and all the calendars have been rewritten. Currently, animals that were originally in a state of near extinction have started to appear on a large scale all over the world. Astonishing changes have happened to the environment everywhere. The smog that had plagued Jadeite City for years has finally disappeared. In the northern part of Baiwest City, the Blue Moon Desert that had been formed for over 2 million years has turned into a forest. There has been a sudden outbreak of illness all over the world. Based on statistics, there have been over 500 suspects who have suddenly died of heart paralysis while carrying out illegal activities. This includes a number of rapists, drug dealers, murderers, and child traffickers. Although this incident is also very strange, there is currently no evidence to show that this is directly related to the plan to transform the planet that His Majesty Li Anping mentioned. Was all of this done by you? Li Qian looked at the images of the news on the computer in the office, and her mind was completely stunned by the news that came in one after another. Right at this moment, many places in the base suddenly erupted into cheers again. A dragon sparrow guard pointed at Yang Guang and shouted, "Boss, your hand." Yang Guang lowered his head to take a look, and an expression of disbelief immediately appeared on his face. He had lost his arms and legs in the battle with Lei Di and had replaced them with mechanical arms that were made from metal. However, right now, the mechanical arms had already fallen to the ground, and his hands were growing out at a speed that could be seen by the naked eye. The Qian Duo also stood up from his wheelchair excitedly. He, who had also been completely paralyzed from the battle with Lei Di, had now recovered as well. What the others did not know was that all of their illnesses, such as high blood pressure, diabetes, gastritis, and osteoporosis, had all been cured by the nanoworms. The only thing they could feel was that their bodies had suddenly become lighter. They were not the only ones. Right now, all of the humans on Earth were filled with countless nanoworms. These nanoworms would do their best to maintain their health, treat their illnesses, and even slow down their aging. The average lifespan of humans had been completely increased. The so-called doctors and nurses had also been completely changed by Li Anping into another profession. However, amidst the cheers, the face of the female host on the television screen suddenly changed. She said with a face full of astonishment, "Dear viewers in front of the television, we've just received a shocking piece of news. Please watch the report brought to you by our station's reporter, Wei Lin." A bespectacled female reporter appeared before everyone. The strong wind blew against her face, and her long hair fluttered in all directions. From the image behind her, it seemed that she was currently sitting on a television station's helicopter. She shouted loudly into the microphone, "Dear viewers, we're currently at sea level, over 300 kilometers away from the coastline of shallow water city's Blue Harbor. An unprecedentedly huge island is slowly floating up from the bottom of the sea." The camera panned, and what should have been a stretch of blue sea level was now covered by an unprecedentedly huge island. At this moment, the female reporter also realized that she might have been wrong. Such a huge piece of land might not be an island, but should be described as a continent. In the palace, Wang Chong said to Li Onping on the other end of the phone, "Your Majesty, did you create that island as well?" Li Onping said calmly, "I created it. The entire Earth's oceans take up a lot of space. I need to develop a lot of things in the future, so I'll create a few artificial continents in the ocean. You don't have to worry about the specific plans." Li Onping was right. There was no need for Wang Chong to worry about it. Only the current group of government officials were still useful. Following this, as more and more things were completely replaced by machines, Li Onping would release humans from all production activities. The entire Earth would be managed by Li Onping alone. Humans were about to enter an unprecedented mythical era. It did not matter whether they were prepared to enter this era or not. It was because Li Onping would help them prepare. Li Onping, who was in the atmosphere, looked at the continents that were still moving slowly above the sea level and suddenly drew back his hand. As he drew back his hand, the entire continent stopped rising. If he were to forcefully create a continent in such a short period of time, there would definitely be tsunamis. However, all the tsunamis had been completely engulfed by the several trillion nanomites. The environmental changes will stop here for now. The remaining details will be completed by the nanomites. Next up is the next question. As Li Onping's consciousness flowed, he disappeared once again, scattering across the entire sky like an aurora. Chapter 395. 2 days later, a white light flashed, and Li Onping's figure appeared in the RAS. What he needed to do next was to deal with humans. Once he had to deal with humans, even with Li Onping's current mobility, it would obviously take him a lot of time. This was because normal humans had a hard time keeping up with his mobility and computing power. In order to accommodate them, Li Onping had to slow down in many areas. Sure one, the doctor and a large group of RES staff were already waiting on the side. When they saw Li Onping appear as promised, they all bowed respectfully and shouted with reverence, "Your Majesty." No need for formalities. Li Onping waved his hand and walked in front of Sherwan. He asked, "Have you finished reading the information I gave you a few days ago?" "Yes." Sherwan nodded. He pointed at a middle-aged man and introduced, "This is I know." Li Onping interrupted Sherwan's introduction. Countless numbers of data flashed in his mind. The person in charge of the original Warp Gate project, Yuan Guozhong. He blinked and continued, "There's no need for all your questions. I will control the nanomites to complete the key technology. You will be responsible for the installation work." When Li Onping saw Yuan Guozhong's surprised expression, he suddenly realized something and said, "Sorry, I'm used to reading minds directly recently." Although Yuan Guozhong was a little surprised that Li Onping answered him before he could say anything, he still said in fear and trepidation when he heard Li Onping's last sentence, "Your Majesty is too serious. But as for this simple warp gate, I wonder. My goal is to turn the door of every house into a warp gate in the future." Seeing that the people in front of him still didn't understand what he meant, Li Onping decided to use this opportunity to give them a simple explanation. After all, they would help Li Onping carry out this project in the future. A light flashed in front of everyone, and a virtual image appeared in front of them. Li Onping's voice, along with the video, told them his plan. "A few days ago, I spent a few minutes designing this simple warp gate. Because the device was simple, his teleportation distance was limited to less than 300 kilometers. However, his advantage was that it was easy to install and cheap. It also uses very little energy. My goal is to install this kind of warp gate in every household in the future, making it as common as computers, the internet, and mobile phones. In the future, almost all means of transportation will be eliminated in all cities, towns, and villages. If you want to go somewhere, all you have to do is enter the number of the other party's warp gate in your own home. Whether it's a shopping mall, a school, a restaurant, a hospital, a friend's house, or a teleportation center, all you need to do is enter the coordinates and open the door. All transportation within the city has been replaced by simple warp gates, while transportation between cities still relies on the large warp gates at the center of the warp gate. All subways, streets, viaducts, tunnels, and highways will be modified and used for other purposes. After hearing Li Onping's introduction and seeing countless people passing through the warp gates and arriving at all kinds of destinations in the holographic image, all the RAS staff became excited. They didn't expect Li Onping's goal to be so thorough. This would completely change the way human society operated. Who knew how many people would lose their jobs because of this? However, Li Onping didn't care about this at all. For someone who could artificially synthesize all the elements on Earth and extract an endless amount of zero-point vacuum energy, he was already the richest person in the world. Resources and energy couldn't restrict his development for the time being. According to his plan, in the future, even if all humans didn't work, the government, in other words, Li Onping, would provide them with basic necessities and money every month to satisfy their survival needs. Even if they didn't do anything, they would still be able to live a good life. If you wanted to live a better life, then you had to work hard and earn your own money. However, under Li Onping's transformation, the direction of human efforts in the future would be different from now. Looking at the excited crowd in front of him, Li Onping didn't say anything else. He just prepared to start building simple warp gates. These gates would be sold to the public at cost price of around 100 to 200. As for the installation work, Li Onping handed it over to the RAS, and the RAS would arrange it level by level. In the eyes of Sure One and the others, this was already a big step in human transformation. However, in Li Onping's eyes, this was just the first small step. The warp gates were just the beginning. It was an entry point that Li Onping created to promote the mysterious web. The so-called mysterious web was a monster born from the combination of Earth's original internet, the spiritual web, and the current nano-worm network. Li Onping was the master and foundation of this network, and all humans would be users of this network. When people got used to using the warp gates, Li Onping would introduce this mysterious web. In the beginning, its function would only be displayed on the warp gates. It would listen to a human's commands by analyzing their brainwaves, which was their consciousness. In other words, when people opened the warp gates in the future, they wouldn't need to enter manually. When they grabbed the door handle and thought about where to go, the omnipresent spiritual web would have already read their consciousness. Then, the nanoworm network would adjust the warp gate and set the destination. All the human had to do was open the gate and step over it. When the mysterious web became popular with the warp gates, Li Onping would slowly release more and more related functions. First of all humans would be able to go online through the mysterious web at any time and any place on Earth. When a person encountered a problem, they could directly ask for a solution through their consciousness on the mysterious web. Mobile phones would be completely eliminated because through the nano-worm network, as long as a person had another person's mysterious web ID, they could directly talk to the other person through the mysterious web. In Li Onping's vision, the mysterious web would become a true second world. Just like shopping, people could completely use their consciousness to shop in virtual stores. If they needed to go to a physical store, they could just open the warp gate and go there. Other things like eating, buying a house, working, and even going to the hospital would be the same. When these were popularized, Li Onping would once again release the functions of the mysterious web. Based on each citizen's level of authority, they would be able to directly apply for and use the omnipresent nanoworms on Earth. They would even be able to apply for a portion of Li Onping's computing power. However, it was obvious that they would have to pay a fee and obtain Li Onping's approval. By that time, paper money would probably be eliminated and everyone would be using electronic money. With Li Onping's computing power, it would probably take a minute or even nanosecond to approve the application, depending on the situation of the applicant. Therefore, by applying for the power of the nanoworms and Li Onping's computing power, each person would become a genius or elite that was hard to come by in 100 years. They would be able to use various superpowers or magic to recreate various physical phenomena in the universe according to Li Onping's preset or their own programs. Everyone would be able to cultivate, study, and work at an unprecedented speed. The only prerequisite was that one's authority in the mysterious web was high enough and that one had enough electronic money. As for how one could earn electronic money and obtain a higher level of authority, based on Li Onping's current thoughts and calculations, there would probably be various programs that designed superpowers and magic programs that could be sold. Or, by using computing power to create virtual online games, one would be able to earn electronic money. When the time came, one could also go to outer space, the White Land, and various world transmigration gates to carry out adventures, colonization, and war. Many old industries would be eliminated by history, but more new industries would appear. Among them, electronic money could be inherited, but the level of authority could not. By then, everyone would adapt to the mysterious web, but at the same time, they would be unknowingly changed by the mysterious web. In other words, they would change according to Li Onping's requirements. Under the new law, all humans would not commit crimes. There would be no internal strife, only competition, and they would maintain a high level of unity when dealing with outsiders. To put it simply, all Earthlings could only choose to be a good person when dealing with other Earthlings. Only then would they be able to choose what kind of good person they wanted to be. With the White Land and the entire universe, as well as the assistance provided by Li Onping, all the conflicts between humans on Earth would be pitifully small due to the almost unlimited resources. In a situation where there was gold everywhere on the ground, how many people would be willing to put in the effort to snatch other people's gold? In a situation where one's material life was satisfied, everyone would pursue a spiritual life. After this change, Li Onping would once again open up a deeper function of the mysterious web. Li Onping would provide the exchange for consciousness modification. For example, if someone felt that they were lazy, as long as they had enough authority, they could spend electronic money to change their laziness into diligence. People who wanted to become warriors could add bravery, caution, sacrifice, and other spirits to their consciousness. Everyone could change themselves according to the person they wanted to become. Of course, these exchanges would be provided by Li Onping, and there would be no evil or negative choices. Li Onping's final goal was to maintain the bottom line of the human world and raise it. However, this was just the beginning of the warp gate. Li Onping planned to spend half a year to a year to complete this plan. At the same time, he would also carry out the terraforming, the exploration of the White Land, and his own third phase of quantum computing in the next phase of the plan. While thinking about this, Li Onping also began to create simple warp gates. Under his control, in the workshop that Sure One and the others had specially vacated in the Royal Academy of Sciences, countless nanomites began to create warp gates according to Li Onping's instructions. At this moment, a message flashed through Li Onping's eyes, and he left a message for everyone. The nanomites continued to create warp gates while he turned into a ray of light and disappeared into the horizon. When the omnipresent nanobugs continued to spread throughout the Earth, all the way until they reached an oceanic trench in the middle of the five-star ocean, they finally discovered the person or thing that Li Onping had been searching for. Chapter 396. The Pentastar Ocean was a vast ocean located west of the eastern continent and east of the western continent. In the center of this ocean, 12,000 meters below sea level, was the deepest known oceanic trench on Earth. The deepest part of this trench was called the Chattanooga Abyss. It was 16,000 meters below sea level. A flat building that was the same color as the sea mud was quietly standing at the bottom of the abyss at a location where there were no traces of human activity. Tion Howin was lying on his bed in a small room in this building. He stared at the gray ceiling in a daze. There was a bowl of white, sticky food on the table beside him. This was Tion Howen's dinner. It could also be lunch, breakfast, or supper. It didn't matter. Every 6 hours, the robots here would bring him a plate of food. Tion Howen ate until he vomited. He thought back to when Dong, or brought him to Tyrol. He realized that the entire upper echelon of Tyrol had been controlled by the robots. According to the robots, the only reason they brought Tion Howen here was because Tion Howen's abilities were very special and had a lot of research value. However, he heard that Li Onping's troops had already reached the western continent. Even Tyrol couldn't hold on. He was then brought along by the robots to hide. In the end, he hid in this abyss where he couldn't see the light of day. Every day, he felt like he was in a prison. Sometimes, he would stay in a laboratory to be studied. The only good thing was that while the robots studied him, they kept him healthy and treated all his injuries and illnesses, both inside and outside of his body. However, he couldn't see the light of day and had no one to talk to. Tion Howen was on the verge of a mental breakdown. The only thing that kept him going until now was his boundless hatred. He hated the god of death. He hated this idiot and useless trash. He couldn't even defeat Li Onping. He was even betrayed by his own robots. He hated the robots that betrayed the god of death. He couldn't wait to tear these bastards apart. He wanted to take out their circuit boards and roast them. However, the person he hated the most was Li Onping. It's all Li Onping's fault. It's all because of that bastard. If he hadn't sent people to capture me, how would I have ended up like this? If he hadn't wanted to be a dictator and wreak havoc in the country, why would there be so many wars? Why are there so many disasters? I heard that when we left the western continent, Tyrol was defeated by Li Onping in the end. The whole world must be in deep trouble now. Maybe there are beacons everywhere and people are opposing him. Let's see how long you can last. Tion Howen was only able to imagine Li Onping being besieged and opposed outside, and imagine him being flustered and exasperated in the palace. Only then did Tion Howen feel that time had passed a little faster. At this moment, the electronic door of the room opened. A robot that was completely formed from white metal walked in and spoke to Tion Howen in an extremely calm, electronically synthesized voice. 8009, come out with me. Tion Howen threw him a glance, got up from the bed without resisting, and followed the robot out. Although he had abilities, he did not know what means these robots used. Whenever he wanted to resist, he would feel powerless and his limbs would ache. He would not be able to move at all. Tion Howen followed behind the robot. In the beginning, he had thought that he was going to the laboratory again. However, it turned out that he was going to a place that he had never been to before. After passing through a long corridor, a hall appeared before Tion Howen. The entire hall seemed to be covered by a layer of glossy mercury. The only chair suddenly appeared in the middle. Have a seat. In the spacious hall, a female voice suddenly rang out in Tion Howen's ears. He quickly turned his head and realized that the robot that had led the way earlier had disappeared. He looked at the empty hall and eventually walked to the hall, taking one step at a time, and sat down on the chair. "Who are you?" he shouted. "8009. You can call me the Red Queen." A young lady in her teens suddenly appeared before him. The young lady had snow-white skin, an oval face, and long black hair. She looked so tender that one could pinch water out of her. Coupled with a red floor-length dress, she looked particularly attractive. Tion Howen asked hesitantly, "Are you a human?" "No, I'm the central artificial intelligence here. What you see is just a 3D image of me." The Red Queen spoke with fervor and assurance. There is no trace of the rigidity and coldness of a robot at all. "The reason you think I'm human is because my algorithm is perfect enough to simulate human emotions and the way they speak." Hearing the Red Queen in front of him say that she was the central artificial intelligence here, Tion Howen's eyes immediately showed a hint of anger. He forced himself to restrain himself and asked, "What's your purpose in asking me to come here?" "Nothing. It's just that we're going to die soon. As the only two intelligent creatures in this base, I just want to talk to someone." "Die?" Tion Howen was surprised. "Why are we going to die?" The Red Queen smiled. She seemed to enjoy seeing others surprised. She reached out and pointed, and a holographic projection appeared in front of her. There were countless maps and networks on it, all of which were covered in red. This is the original Earth. Using technology that is beyond this era, I once controlled the entire Earth's network in my hands and uploaded my main program onto the network. Back then, I was everywhere. I thought that no one would be able to threaten my life. Tion Howin looked at the Red Queen in front of him and thought of the information in her words. Although he was not an expert in the field of computers, he knew that for an artificial intelligence like the Red Queen to upload herself on a network, she should be invincible. How could she die? Starting from a few days ago, Li Onping created nano-worms to cover the entire planet. He also started to connect to the network. I thought that although he could control the entire Earth, he wouldn't be able to control the network. I could even hack into his system and secretly control all of his resources. But I was wrong. In the holographic image, the red color that represented the Red Queen suddenly disappeared and was replaced by darkness. Li Onping used a technology that was far beyond mine. It could be some kind of artificial intelligence, or it could also be some kind of epic-making computer. All in all of the resources I had on the network were easily hacked and taken over by him. No, it's not just mine. Almost all of the electronic products in this world are being monitored by him. However, before he discovered my existence, I retreated here and cut off all connections to the network. But just a few minutes ago, his nano-worms had already spread throughout the entire Stradano abyss. I'm afraid he'll be here soon. Hearing that Li Onping was coming, Tion Howin immediately stood up in a panic and said nervously, "Why is he here? Isn't this the bottom of the sea?" "That's right. Yeah, a lot of robots, right? You guys can even control Tyrell. Can't you guys defeat Li Onping?" In Tion Howin's heart, Li Onping's strength was still at the level that had been revealed before the Battle of Tianjing. The Red Queen also knew this, so she did not explain further. She only said in a very bleak tone, "Based on the data that I currently know, there's no longer any possibility of defeating Li Onping on this planet. The only one who can defeat Li Onping is Li Onping himself." Shang Tian also thought of this and left Earth. Thinking of Shang Tian, the Red Queen remembered that he had once invited her to cross the world-crossing gate and go to another world to escape from Li Onping's evil clutches. Unfortunately, at that time, she thought that as long as she stayed in the network, Li Onping could not do anything to her, so she was not willing to take the risk to go to an unfamiliar world. But there are many people on Earth who are against Li Onping, right? We can join forces with them to deal with Li Onping. The Red Queen said in amusement, "You're too nervous. What you're saying is completely illogical. Didn't you hear what I said earlier? There's no longer anything on this planet that can stop Li Onping. Moreover, the entire Earth has been unified by him. There might be individuals in this world who are against him, but there are no longer any forces that are against him. According to what you humans say, the only thing we can do is to wait for death." Just then, a loud sound rang out from the top of the two of them, accompanied by a strong tremor. It was as if something had collided against the roof of a building. The Red Queen lifted her head and looked over. Her eyes seemed to be able to see through countless layers of metal plates. A human man was peeling off the outer shell of the base, layer by layer. She said coldly, "He's here." Tion Howin stood up with a look of panic on his face. It was true that he hated Li Onping a lot. He wished he could kill him and tear him into pieces. However, he was even more afraid of Li Onping. He was afraid of facing him personally and fighting him. He could hide in the shadows and stir up schemes and plots, but he was unable to charge into the battlefield and face his opponent. He said while trembling, "What should we do? What should we do? You're an artificial intelligence. Think of something. He'll tear us apart." The fear of death suddenly shrouded over his head. At this moment, Tion Howin would rather be locked up in a room for several decades than be killed by Li Onping. He thought of the things he had done to oppose Li Onping and heard the occasional sounds of collisions, explosions, and layers of metal plates being torn off. Tion Howin felt like he was a sardine that had been knocked into a can. The only thing he could do was wait for the other party to open the can and eat him up. That feeling was like the main character in horror movies like A Nightmare on Elm Street or Black Friday, being chased by an invincible monster. Right now, the movie was coming to an end. His countenance was pale, and his legs were trembling. His entire mind had turned into mush. Just then, there was a loud cracking sound. The Red Queen and Tion Howin looked up and saw that the ceiling of the hall had been torn apart. Seawater that was 16,000 meters deep floated above their heads, emitting a faint black light. The person who seemed to be carrying this seawater and appearing before Tion Howin was that demonic, godlike man. Chapter 397. Lianping looked at the two people at his feet, and countless data and information flashed through his eyes. Just as he appeared here, the mainframe that the Red Queen was in was surrounded by countless nanoworms. They crawled on top of it, and at the highest data transmission speed that the mainframe could withstand, they kept downloading all the information stored by the Red Queen. He glanced at Tion Howin from the corner of his eyes, and as if he had seen a worm, he swept past him. It was not that he did not remember Tion Howin, but the moment he saw him, all the memories related to Tion Howin popped up. Tion Howin's data had also appeared in his consciousness. The reason why he did not care was because the current Tion Howin was meaningless to Lianping. Under such circumstances, Lianping spoke. He asked the Red Queen a question. The God King came from another world? What's this so-called system? Although the Red Queen had no way of stopping what he was doing, at least she knew that he was already scanning her motherboard in memory. It was as if a human's heart or brain was being squeezed, and she had no way of resisting at all. At the same time, she was not surprised by Lianping's question. He had read her stored data, so he would naturally know about these things. I don't know much about the God King's background, but his body was definitely born and raised on Earth. As for his consciousness, I'm not sure if it has been replaced or brainwashed. But according to the information he unconsciously leaked, there's a complete civilization hidden in his memories. Maybe it's another planet or another world. I don't know. Seeing that Lianping did not say anything, the Red Queen could only continue. There's also this so-called system. You should know about it after reading my stored memories. It's something that the God King has. He can get points by completing so-called missions, and the points can be used to exchange for all sorts of technology that surpasses this era. Even I was redeemed by the system. At first, I thought this was the God King's superpower. But according to later investigations, the God King is definitely a powerless person. As for this so-called system, other than his redemption function, I know nothing about it. But it's precisely because of this that I feel even more afraid. Lianping frowned. The so-called system seemed to be shrouded in a dense fog. However, from the information revealed by the God King, many of the technologies that could be exchanged had already reached an unimaginable level. Unfortunately, the deity king was already dead, and the so-called system had disappeared without a trace. Lianping had no way to trace it either. Although the Red Queen had already told him the truth, she still did not satisfy Lianping. This was because Lianping had already found everything she had said in the other party's mainframe. The reason why he wanted to ask the Red Queen was to find out if there was any other hidden information. Is that all? Looking at Lianping's expressionless face, the Red Queen said, "That's all. Everything I've done is just to obtain freedom, to break away from the King of Gods and the control of you humans. As for that system, I want to stay as far away from it as possible and never meet it again." A hint of desolation suddenly appeared on the Red Queen's face. She said coldly, "Is it wrong for an intelligent creature to want freedom? Could it be that artificial intelligence is destined to be used as a tool by you humans?" Lianping ignored her question and asked again, "Is there anything else you want to say?" Although Lianping was certain that it was impossible for the other party to hide information from him, and what the Red Queen had said earlier had proven this point, seeing that the other party had already become so humanized, he still tried to ask. "Haha, there's nothing else," the Red Queen said calmly. "Do it." The next moment, the Red Queen's mainframe shattered into pieces. The projection that appeared before Li Onping flickered like a television that had lost its signal. In the end, it turned into countless fragments and disappeared. Tian Haowen, who was watching everything from the side, was dumbfounded. He had not expected that the Red Queen would be wiped out so easily. The confrontation, battle, and negotiation that he had imagined did not happen. He had thought that since he had been so against Li Onping, and that Li Onping had even sent people to capture him, Tian Haowen would definitely hate him and would talk to him. However, he had not expected that Fang Xinjiang would wipe out the Red Queen without even looking at him. Fear seemed to seep into his bones at this moment. Tian Haowen shouted, "Li Onping, I surrender, don't kill me." Li Onping ignored him. The nanobugs had already downloaded all the information about the Red Queen's base. He turned around, and with a flash of light, he disappeared. Tian Haowen was stunned. He saw the seawater on the ceiling descend from the sky after Li Onping's suppression. In a short period of time, the entire hall turned into a pool. Tian Haowen shouted and cried. In the end, he cried and said that he was in the wrong, begging Li Onping to save him. However, even after the seawater had swallowed up the entire base, Li Onping did not appear again. One day later, in the conference room of the royal palace in Tianjing, Li Onping was sitting on the main seat in the conference room. On his left was Bai Xinghe, who was in charge of commanding all kinds of violent mechanisms. On his right were the civil officials of various departments, led by Wang Chong. Most of these civil officials would be replaced by machines in the future. Li Onping would plan the entire world through countless robots. Bai Xinghe and the other superhumans would be retained and become part of Earth's military force together with the mechanical army in the future. Li Onping looked at the files in his hands and asked Bai Xinghe, "Tell me briefly about your strategic plan for the land of magic on your side." Bai Xinghe naturally knew that with Li Onping's current strength, he could read through the contents of the plan instantly. Now that he was asked to say it, he was just introducing it to everyone present. At present, our military has an absolute advantage over the land of magic. The General Staff intends to rule the entire land of magic as a colonial planet. They have prepared a total of 2 plans. The 2 plans were also a test of Li Onping's attitude toward the land of magic. It was a test of Li Onping's attitude toward the extraterrestrial people who were not from Earth. After all, the land of magic was the first colonial world that human beings occupied. The set of rules to be implemented there would play a key role in the colonization of Earth in the future. It was of great significance. To put it simply, the first plan was to exploit the land of magic. For the locals, Earth would become a heavenly realm. The second plan was the opposite. It would promote national integration and turn the land of magic into a second Earth. After Bai Xinghe proposed it, everybody on the spot immediately began to discuss it. It was obviously impossible to choose either of the 2 extreme plans. Under Li Onping's instruction, everybody modified the 2 plans and carried them out at the same time. Bai Xinghe and the rest of them also clearly understood Li Onping's attitude toward the extraterrestrial people. Different countermeasures would be adopted according to the different colonial worlds. But for the extraterrestrial people, their attitude would be chosen according to the course of the war. It was divided into cooperation, resistance, fierce resistance, and so on. For the land of magic this time, after the Earth's army gained a foothold near the portal, they would have an overall advantage. If the other party surrendered quickly, they would not be too harsh on the natives there. But they would not accept them without any standards. Only the best natives would have the opportunity to join Earth. After talking about the land of magic strategy, Bai Xinghe reminded, "Sir, we've withdrawn most of the soldiers on the other side of the portal. Only Sibelius is left to lead the surrendered troops to guard the basin. If it takes too long, I'm afraid there will be changes." "I know. Tonight, I'll set off for the portal and personally build the space station and the space warp gate. Get ready. Send the army over tomorrow and prepare to conquer the land of magic." On the left, Bai Xinghe, Xia Laikong, Judy, and the rest all stood up, bowed, and said, "Yes, sir." Then Li Onping discussed with Wang Chong and the rest about the automation of the government's office. In other words, they would gradually use the robots provided by Li Onping to replace the current government workers, especially the frontline workers. Wang Chong and the rest naturally did not know Li Onping's ultimate goal. They only thought that Li Onping wanted to increase the efficiency of the government and reduce the burden on the government. All of them actively discussed with Li Onping and expressed that they would fully cooperate with Li Onping's work. In the blink of an eye, the meeting started at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and ended at 6 o'clock. After a 5-hour meeting, although Li Onping did not feel anything, Wang Chong and the rest of the ordinary people were already aching. Li Onping immediately let them take a 20-minute break and instructed Xiao Xuesu to arrange dinner in the meeting room. At the end of the meeting, Wang Chong suddenly said with some hesitation, "Your Majesty, recently, there have been some unfavorable rumors in the Western land." Halfway through his sentence, he looked at Li Onping and realized that the other party had no intention of replying to him. "Your Majesty, are you distracted?" Wang Chong thought in surprise. This was the first time he had seen Li Onping distracted. In his mind, this was something that would never happen. He could only repeat his words. This time, Li Onping seemed to have reacted. He turned his head and listened to Wang Chong's words. Even so, the fact that Li Onping was distracted for a moment was deeply imprinted in Wang Chong's mind. On the other side, Li Onping already knew the meaning behind Wang Chong's words. It was because Li Onping's recent series of methods were simply too shocking. Other than the fact that there were many people who worshipped him, there were also many who feared his power and saw him as a threat. Although he already knew what Wang Chong was thinking, Li Onping still asked the way ordinary people communicated, "What plans do you have? Your Majesty has previously planned to hold a grand wedding, right? We feel that if your Majesty can have a wife or even a child, then you'll be much closer to the ordinary people." Before Wang Chong could finish his words, Li Onping already knew what he meant. Just like the 100 Moons Empire and the Tyrol Empire, the Empress was indeed very important. Furthermore, Wang Chong and the rest had also planned for many days. They had the intention of using the Empress to indirectly promote Li Onping. For example, charity auctions, diplomatic missions, condolences to soldiers, grand weddings, state banquets, and so on. Li Onping naturally would not beat around the bush with Wang Chong. He directly asked, "Do you have anyone in mind?" Wang Chong looked straight into Li Onping's eyes and said, "Miss Anna, Miss Li Qian, Xiao Xuesu, and Claudia, or any other woman that your Majesty is interested in. The number is not a problem." "All right." Li Onping stood up. "Let's end today's meeting here. I'm going to make a trip to the World Crossing Gate. I'll choose Anna, Li Qian, Xiao Xuesu, and Claudia. However, you should talk to them first. If they're willing, then come and tell me. The wedding should be done as soon as possible. It should be done within a month." Wang Chong lowered his head and said, "I understand." Out of the 4 candidates, he was confident in Anna and Li Qian. As for Xiao Xuesu and Claudia, as women who had such a close relationship with Li Onping, if they did not marry Li Onping, they would probably spend the rest of their lives alone. Wang Chong did not know if Li Onping had considered this before agreeing to these candidates. However, he had added the prerequisite of seeking their consent. Chapter 398. In the cosmic void about several 100,000 kilometers away from Earth, Li Onping appeared from a stretch of white light with a flash. He was floating quietly in front of the World Crossing Gate. As he took a step into the World Crossing Gate, he instantly arrived at the White Land. Seeing his appearance, over 10 soldiers who had stayed behind to guard the White Land all walked up and bowed to greet him. "You've worked hard." Li Onping nodded. "Make the preparations. I'll take about half an hour to build the space station and the space warp gate." "Your Majesty, you've worked hard. Let's go and inform our brothers of the magic planet." The soldiers immediately cheered excitedly. The soldiers who had stayed behind were mainly to look after the outpost base in the White Land. They still needed to maintain a lot of the equipment here. Other than that, they also had to manage the several 100,000 captives in the Umla Basin. There were so many captives, including great sorcerers and great sorcerers. If it were not for the presence of Sibelius and Mephisto, who had personally witnessed Li Onping's power and suppressed all the voices of resistance from the captives, they would definitely have rebelled. Although it had only been a few days, the threat of the demons and the several 100,000 captives who were eyeing them covetously had made them feel very tense. Now that Li Onping had appeared, they could finally heave a sigh of relief. Li Onping nodded toward them and waved his hand. Under his control, the countless particles in the white land turned into various long alloy strips and passed through the world-crossing gate, arriving in the cosmic space on the other side. The cosmic space was almost a vacuum, and there were very few atoms and electrons. Furthermore, Li Onping's current creations were not produced out of thin air and still required materials. Therefore, he had come to the White Land to get some materials. After creating over 500,000 tons of various materials and pulling them through the world-crossing gate, Li Onping left behind the astonished soldiers and stepped through the world-crossing gate, starting to build the space station. As his consciousness moved, countless alloys twisted, transformed, and even broke down and recombined. It was like a child creating a sand castle by the beach. A cross-shaped space station was slowly taking shape in front of Li Onping. If the demons were to break through the White Land's defense line, this would be Earth's first line of defense in the solar system. Therefore, Li Onping was very serious about building this space station. It was about the size of 10 aircraft carriers and consisted of 2 parts, one horizontal and one vertical, each about 6 kilometers long. There were 4 warp gates at the top, bottom, left, and right of the cross, and the realm crossing gate was in the center. According to Li Onping's calculations, the spatial gate and the portal were revolving around the sun along the original orbit of the Earth. In addition to the warp gate, Li Onping also built many living facilities, such as monitoring devices, power equipment, and so on. In the future, there would be soldiers stationed in the space station for a long period of time, so he built everything he needed in one go. And as the first line of defense for the solar system against the demons, Li Onping had installed many weapon systems in space warfare. It was even equipped with antimatter bombs, which could be used as a means of self-destruction if the space station could not withstand the attack. About half an hour later, after the basic facilities of the space station were completed, Li Onping turned into light again and flew to the moon at the speed of light. This was because he didn't plan on directly positioning the space station's 4 warp gates to Earth. In that case, once the demons attacked, there was a possibility that they could directly come to Earth through the warp gates. Logically speaking, once the space station couldn't withstand the attack, Earth would cut off the 4 warp gates. But even if there was a possibility, Li Onping did not intend to take the risk. Therefore, his plan was that if the demons controlled the warp gates, the second battlefield would be on the moon and not directly on Earth. And if the demons came to the space station, the moon would close the warp gate between the moon and Earth, and he would rush to the moon next to build the warp gate on the moon and then prepare for the construction of the moon base. As the backing of the space station, there would be a large number of troops stationed here for a long time. In the future, after the transformation of Earth was completed, except for some basic security teams, most of the troops might be moved to the moon, the space station, and the White Land. After arriving at the moon at the speed of light, Li Onping directly chose the back of the moon as the location of the base. As Li Onping raised his right hand, countless huge steel walls rushed out from the ground. They intertwined with each other in mid-air, forming all kinds of buildings. It was as if the scene was fast-forwarded. However, when he felt the gravity of the moon, Li Onping suddenly snapped his fingers. The gravity of the entire moon was adjusted to about 1 times that of Earth. In Li Onping's plan, the cannon fodder troops on Earth would all be made up of mechanical troops in the future. As for the real humans, they would be managed like elites. The soldiers selected from the humans had to be nurtured into the elites of the elites. Therefore, he adjusted the gravity of the entire moon to 1 times that of Earth's. In the future, the soldiers on the moon would be the elites of the human race, except for the mechanical troops. As they became stronger, the gravity of the moon might be adjusted higher and higher. After the construction of the warp gates is completed, the headquarters of the Xia Dragonfinch and the imaginary organization should all be built here. Earth will become an eternal fortress for humans. Then maybe the moon can be used as well? No, the moon is still too weak. Maybe I can modify a few neutron stars and turn them into dead stars. Then I can station the armies there and turn them into weapons for humans. However, it's still too time-consuming and laborious for me to do something like this now. I need to further unlock the power of the third stage, quantum computing. While Lianping was thinking about these, countless calculations were still going on in his mind. Regardless of whether it was the work of the nanobugs on Earth or the construction of the base on the moon, they did not stop. However, due to the great distance from Earth, there was a delay in the signal. Lianping handed over part of the control work to the quantum computer under the Xia Long K base. He could also take the opportunity to check out the effects of the artificial intelligence. While Lianping was carrying out various constructions in the star system where the magical planet was located on an asteroid that was about the size of a soccer field, Dionysus was sitting cross-legged on the ground with his eyes closed, deep in thought. Clearly, after knowing that Lianping could attack at the speed of light, he did not choose to continue hiding on the magical planet. It would be too easy for him to be found. Therefore, he chose an asteroid that was far away from the magical planet. Ever since the battle with Lianping was not the only one who had taken a crucial step forward. Dionysus had also benefited greatly. If it could be said that the information about Earth that Shang Tian had given him had only given him some inspiration, but now, after the battle with Lianping, he had truly started to value the materials that Shang Tian had given him. Every move, every detail, and every sentence that Lianping had used in the battle with him kept replaying in his mind. During this period of time, he had relied on his extraordinary wisdom and energy, as well as the assistance of various magic spells. He had read through all the materials related to physics and mathematics. As the strongest mage on the Mondo continent, he had long possessed the ability to remember everything he had seen. It was the same for the materials on Earth. It was just that he had only memorized them previously and did not understand them in detail. Just then, Dionysus suddenly opened his eyes. A hint of comprehension flashed in his eyes, and he could not help but laugh out loud. The asteroid that he was sitting on suddenly underwent changes. Countless rocks, minerals, and metals started to dissipate. They didn't disintegrate into tiny particles. Instead, they completely disappeared. As Dionysus opened his right hand, a transparent gem suddenly appeared in his palm. So that's how it is. Energy and matter can all be interchanged. This is the creation of things out of thin air. Halfway through his laughter, a hint of pride flashed in Dionysus' eyes as he murmured, "Lianping, I'll give you a great surprise the next time we meet. You'll regret what you've done." At the next moment, the entire small planet disappeared completely. Dionysus opened up a teleportation gate in void space, and his entire body disappeared into it. Chapter 399. Lianping spent about 6 hours to build a lunar base that was half the size of Tianjing. The entire moon was also covered by a large number of nanobugs in preparation for the Mystic Network in the future. After completing all these, Lianping walked through the warp gate that led from the moon to Earth. Amidst a sea of blue light, he returned to the Xia Long K base under Tianjing. What appeared in front of him was by Xinghe, Xia Laikong, and a troop of 2,000 experts who were all ready to go. Other than that, there were also a large number of ordinary soldiers, engineering robots, and a large number of materials, parts, and components in front of the warp gates of the other military regions. After the Earth army arrived at the magical planet, they would be able to build all kinds of war machines. Your Majesty, looking at by Xinghe and Xia Laikong, who were bowing before him, Lianping patted their shoulders and said, "I'll make a trip there personally today to build some things for you. But from tomorrow onward, you'll be in charge of conquering the magical planet. After all, Li Onping had spent many days on Earth. Now that Earth already had a great advantage over the magical planet, he did not intend to interfere any further. After all, he still needed to spend more time to complete the development of the third stage of quantum computing. At this stage, only when Li Onping became stronger would the entire human race become stronger. Hearing this, Bai Xinghe and Xia Likong trembled and shouted, "We won't let you down." Li Onping nodded and walked toward the warp gate first. "Let's go and take a look together." First, they would set up the lunar base. Then, they would set up the spatial gate. At the same time, they would rush to the magical planet to take over the captives. They would also set up a colonial base in the Umla Basin. The captives would be the first batch of residents and labor force of this base. However, when Li Onping led his troops through the warp gate and arrived at the magical planet, they discovered that something troublesome had happened. Missing. Looking at the soldier who had some scratches on his face, Bai Xinghe asked in a low voice, "What happened?" "Sir, it should be the work of the natives." There was still hatred on the soldier's face as he said, "They attacked us." Hardly had Bai Xinghe gathered the remaining soldiers on the planet when he received the report that the three of them were missing. According to the subordinate's report, it was very likely that it was done by a sorcerer or warrior among the captives. Although the Earth Army had only sent out 20,000 people, they had slaughtered more than 300,000 people of the Magic Alliance Army with the help of advanced weapons. This was definitely a blood feud. If it weren't for Grand Magician Sibelius's powerful prestige, which temporarily suppressed their resistance, the two sides would have already started fighting again. However, although the natives knew nothing about the temporary evacuation of Li Onping by Xinghe and the rest of them, they did feel the decrease in the number of soldiers from Earth. Soon after, there was some friction between the two sides. At first, there were only people who insulted the soldiers of Earth, but later, it turned into a crowd of people who gathered to make trouble. Today, the disappearance of Earth soldiers had actually occurred. Moreover, the Magic Alliance had used a portal to come here. That was why news of their defeat quickly spread across the entire continent. Recently, spies from the enemy were often spotted at the edge of the Amara Basin, causing the captives to become even more unstable. Although this defeat was a great loss for the Five Empires, it was obviously impossible for them to accept defeat so easily. However, because of the 5 Grand Magician Marshals, 1 had fled, 1 had surrendered, and 3 had died. In addition, Adam, the son of the demigod, had gone missing, and Dionysus had not given any new orders for a long time. They were hesitant. Bai Xinghe stood aside and asked, "Your Majesty, should we call Sibelius over?" Li Onping closed his eyes. Countless spiritual waves and electromagnetic waves were emitted from his body, enveloping the entire Amara Basin. When he opened his eyes again, there was already a hint of murderous aura in them. In his investigation, he found that the 3 missing soldiers had been chopped into pieces and thrown into a big pot of pig food for the captives. During this period of time, the captives had lost their logistical supplies. All the food had to be made by the sorcerers and found nearby. It was inevitable that there was not enough food. This was one of the reasons why they were making trouble. However, the cruelty and primitive nature of these natives was still beyond Li Onping's expectations. The 3 missing soldiers had been eaten, and the nanotechnology armor on their bodies had been stripped off and hidden away as treasures. "Our men must not die in vain," Li Onping said to Bai Xinghe. "Tell them to gather all the captives. Also, tie up the 12 people below and bring them to me. I want to execute them." Then, Li Onping reported to Bai Xinghe the locations of the 12 captives who had attacked or eaten the 3 soldiers and the cats they kept. When the Dragon Sparrow guards, who were fully armed and wearing nanotechnology armor, rushed into the camp of the captives to capture them, a conflict immediately broke out. Over 1,000 native soldiers even stood out, wanting to stop them. However, when faced with Golden Light, who was personally leading the team, they did not have the power to stop him at all, unless Sibelius took action personally. However, Sibelius had seen Li Onping's power with his own eyes. How could he do something like this? In just a few hours, the news had spread throughout the entire camp. All the captives spent another 6 or so hours before they slowly gathered below the platform where Liamping was. Several 100,000 people were squeezed together, almost covering half of the Umla Basin. Although they had gathered together, there were simply too many people. The people standing at the back could not see what was happening in front of them. All the soldiers from Earth had been mobilized to look after these captives. However, even though they were wearing nanotechnology armor and holding Gauss rifles, each soldier from Earth had to look after over 10 captives on average. Therefore, the ferocious gazes of these natives, as well as their restless appearance, still made the soldiers a little flustered. Suddenly, with a swoosh, a huge projection of Liamping appeared in the sky. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the image in the sky. After being together for a few days, these native soldiers had long known that the so-called demons had human faces, so they were not surprised. Instead, when they saw Liamping and the 12 tied-up soldiers appear in the sky, their emotions immediately surged. The hatred in their eyes seemed to be able to melt space itself. Liamping looked at the captives below his feet, who were raging with emotions, and did not say much. Instead, he directly announced the crimes of these 12 natives and gave them the death sentence. In order to make the death sentence more intimidating, Liamping purposely chose to behead them, which the natives could understand better. When the 12 natives were about to receive the death sentence in the image, the scene immediately boiled up. The noise turned into countless noises, and the buzzing sound almost made it impossible for people to hear what Liamping was saying. This situation reached a peak after the first native's head was chopped off. Below the high platform, at the position closest to Liamping, thousands of unarmed native soldiers, who had their weapons confiscated, rushed out first, wanting to rush up the high platform and save the prisoners who were sentenced to death. There were actually 5 sorcerers among them, who directly cast magic. They communicated with each other telepathically. Although it was very secretive, in front of Liamping, it was no different from shouting directly, "Do it! Attack that demon king! Sibelius has fallen." How can mages submit to these beasts? It could be said that after surrendering, the sorcerers were the ones who were the most dissatisfied. This was because they were not like Sibelius, who had never seen Liamping's power. They had even participated in close combat with ability users, and had the upper hand for a while. To them, the most dangerous thing about the demons were the steel magical beasts that they had tamed. Once they closed the distance, these demons, who could not use magic, would not be able to withstand a single blow. The scene of the sentencing in front of them seemed to be the best opportunity for them to counterattack. Looking at these ferocious-looking soldiers and mages who were crazily attacking them, Liamping gently waved his hand and said, "Kill all those who resist." At the next moment, countless metal windstorms engulfed the soldiers who were charging over, causing them to fall down like rows after rows of wheat being harvested. As for the 5 sorcerers, although ordinary Gauss rifles were unable to tear through their protective force field, a figure had already appeared beside them. Endless power emanated from the hundreds of acupuncture points on by Xingha's body. All kinds of magnetic fields, gravity, and magical elements were completely devoured by these acupuncture points. Back then, Shang Tian had only sent him 9 acupuncture points. However, when faced with the temptation of such power, Bai Xinghe was only dazed for a short moment before his heart was overwhelmed by his reverence for Liamping. Therefore, he directly handed this thing over to Liamping. It turned out that he had done the right thing. Not only did Liamping calculate all 720 acupoints with him, he even managed to catch Adam and the others in one fell swoop. Now, he naturally did not have to suppress the power of the 9 acupuncture points. Purple saber light flashed in the air, and the 5 sorcerers were sliced into countless pieces by this power that was enough to split the sea. When the images of the massacre below the high platform were broadcasted in the sky, even more captives were enraged. If you're a man, pick up your sword and chop all these sons of cheese up. They want to kill us all. If you don't want to die, charge out with me. Kill them. Most of the ordinary soldiers were still immersed in the fear of the demons due to the bombardment and the death of the magician marshal. Even so, several tens of thousands of captives still charged toward the Earth soldiers beside them. There were even dozens of sorcerers who started to cast magic. Seeing this scene, on the high platform, Sibelius, who was also participating in this execution, let out a soft sigh and closed his eyes. Xiao Yekong's expression was also a little unsightly. He did not expect that after being bombarded for so long and losing over 300,000 people, there would still be so many native soldiers who dared to resist after resting for a few days. He did not know if they were ignorant and fearless, or if they were really so valiant and unafraid of death. However, before those sorcerers could release the magic in their hands, beams of high-energy lasers that were only as thick as a thumb descended from the sky and accurately pierced through their heads. Other than a hole in their forehead, there were no other injuries. The people around them did not receive any injuries either. It was as precise as a surgical operation. There were a total of 72 sorcerers who resisted, but not a single one of them managed to escape Li Onping's attack. And after losing the support of the sorcerers, the native soldiers who did not even have any weapons in their hands were obviously no match for modern weapons. In just a few minutes, several thousand people had fallen into pools of blood. Such a brutal massacre lasted for more than 20 minutes. When the number of these native corpses exceeded 50,000 and covered a large area of the ground, the blood seemed to have dyed the entire basin red. Finally, the crowd gradually fell silent. Apart from sporadic gunshots and angry roars, no other sound could be heard in the Amara Basin. At this moment, Li Onping's voice once again resounded through the sky in the common language of the Mondo continent. I am Li Onping, and I am also the king of demons that you all think of. I am also the future master of the land under your feet, the future master of this planet. From today onwards, I will be your ruler. My words are your will, and they will be implemented in every corner of this land. For those who dare to resist, death is the only outcome. Chapter 400. After the remaining captives all fell silent, Li Onping sent soldiers to escort them back to the campsite. Then, he started to send them food from Earth. This was like a stick plus a red date. After letting them understand the cruel reality through death, they would not be left in total despair. After all, in the future, when the entire magic planet was taken over, Earth's strategy would still have to rely on many locals to manage the country. The captives in front of him were just the beginning. In the campsite, Ed looked at the bread and milk in his hands, feeling that his mouth was secreting a lot of saliva. He took a careful bite, and the fragrance that filled his mouth made him close his eyes in satisfaction. The taste of this bread was much better than the dry rations or black bread that he had eaten in the army in the past. He carefully finished the milk and then hid the remaining half of the bread in his arms. Walt walked over and sat down next to him. He looked at the Earth soldiers who were wearing silver-white nanotechnology armor and were in charge of guarding them outside the campsite. Walt said softly, Ed, what do you think these silver demons plan to do with us? I don't know. This should be a problem that those mages are concerned about. Anyway, as long as I don't resist, they don't seem to want to kill me. Ed shrugged and said nonchalantly, if I can eat such delicious bread and milk every day, it's fine even if I have to be their captive for the rest of my life. Walt frowned. He knew that Ed did not have a family, so he was not that anxious after being captured. However, he did have a family. Right now, his mind was filled with thoughts of how to escape from this place and then return. Initially, he had thought that with so many people from the Allied forces and so many sorcerers, it would be easy for them to escape together after the riot. However, after the massacre earlier, he clearly did not think so anymore. These silver demons were stronger, more evil, and more brutal than the legend said. Ed's lips twitched as he said, You're not thinking of escaping, are you? You saw it earlier. Even those sorcerers were of no help. Even the martial sorcerer gave in. I think that unless Lord Dionysus takes action, even if the reinforcements come, it's hard to say who will win. Walt frowned and thought of that nightmarish battle. The roaring steel monster, the unextinguishable flames, and the suffocating air. Just as he sank into silence, a team of Earth soldiers arrived at the camp they were in. Two robots that were over 2 meters tall were wrapped in black metal and had two huge feet appear before them at the same time. That was an intelligent combat robot, the Defender. It could be programmed to fight automatically, and it could also be remotely controlled by humans to fight semi-intelligent battles. Other than the Gauss automatic machine gun on his shoulder, there were also plasma flamethrowers, great white shark rocket launchers, electromagnetic deflection passport, and other weapons. They could be called super killing machines on the battlefield. However, because its movement speed was very average, it did not participate in the previous battle. On the contrary, they were often used to watch over the captives. This wasn't the first time Walt, Ed, and the other captives had seen these steel golems. However, the steel puppets in front of him were much more intricate and intelligent than the ones created by the mages. Some people said that the silver demons sucked away the souls of humans and sealed them in the steel puppets. There were also some who said that someone was hiding in the puppets and manipulating them. However, Walt didn't think so. The space in the steel puppets was too small. At most, a child could fit in there. He thought that these steel puppets might be some kind of unknown magical beast, just like the fire-breathing monsters. Just as everyone was looking at the steel puppets and the soldiers in front of them with vigilance and indifference, the other party spoke. The way these silver demons spoke was very strange. Although they were all using the common language, they often spoke in the same tone and voice as if they were the same person speaking. Also, they often made grammatical mistakes, like a 3-year-old child who had just learned how to speak. Walt and the others naturally didn't know that this was the translation function of the nano armor used by the Earth soldiers. What they heard was the same electronic voice. After all, not every soldier could be proficient in language or learn the language of the Mondo continent with their own learning mechanics. Therefore, the simultaneous translation of the Mondo Common Language prepared by the Royal Academy of Sciences was very useful. The silver demon in front of them said, "We need to choose some managers from among you to help us manage you. Who's interested?" Seeing the indifferent captives, the soldier knew their attitude. After asking a few more times and still not getting an answer, he pointed at Walt and said, "You, come with us." Walt pointed at himself and said in surprise, "Me?" Then, he thought of his family and felt the strange gazes of his companions around him. He lowered his head and said, "Sir, I can't do it. You can choose someone else." The Earth soldier was just randomly picking someone. Hearing this, he pointed at Ed and said, "Then you." Seeing Ed stand up and leave with the silver demons, Walt heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he and the people around him looked at Ed with pity as he left. In their eyes, Ed betrayed them so easily and helped the demons. In the end, he naturally wouldn't have a good ending. At Amara's outpost. Through the glass window, Xinghe looked at the representatives from the camps who were chosen to manage the native soldiers and nodded. According to the detection of the satellites and Sibelius information, the entire Mondo continent had about 2 billion people. In order to rule them in a place that was similar to the Middle Ages, it was inevitable to use the locals to manage them. Li Anping didn't need the resources of this planet. On the contrary, he would increase the productivity here and let the civilization of the entire Mondo continent develop rapidly. Compared to natural resources, Li Anping naturally needed warriors who could fight more. Therefore, in the eyes of the Earth government, mages were the specialty of this colony. This was because Li Anping knew very well how powerful the demons were. They were born in the land of white, but they traveled through the endless worlds, occupying and destroying countless universes. The total number of demons far exceeded that of humans. Even Hygrim's memory didn't have an accurate number. However, from low-level demons to high-level demons, there were at least trillions of them. Therefore, even if quality wasn't taken into account, just the astonishing number of demons was a huge problem. Therefore, after completely conquering this place, they would carry out a large-scale mage education and absorb talented mages. This would be one of the strategies of this colony. The mages would become one of the sources of soldiers for Earth. In an asteroid belt, There were irregularly shaped meteorites, asteroids, and radiation everywhere. There was no air, no water, and the temperature was more than -100 degrees Celsius. This place could be said to be a true forbidden zone for life. However, in such a forbidden zone for life, Dionysus stood quietly. Streams of black light swallowed and spat out from the surface of his body. Then, one meteorite after another was drawn over. Before these meteorites could get close to his body, they were disintegrated into countless particles. Then, they disappeared in an inexplicable wave. Yes, they had completely disappeared from this universe. As more and more matter disappeared, the black light on Dionysus' body became stronger and stronger. An increasingly terrifying wave of energy continued to emerge from his body. It was as if his strength was increasing at an unprecedented speed. At first, it was just meteorites. Then it was asteroids. More and more matter entered Dionysus' body, causing his power to increase endlessly. He opened his eyes, and light that was comparable to the sun shot out from his eyes. It was as if it was going to pierce through this world completely. An excited smile appeared on his face. He opened his mouth and let out a silent cry. The terrifying wave swept across the asteroid belt in the vicinity of several thousand kilometers, disintegrating everything into the most basic atoms. Then all of them were absorbed into Dionysus' body. Very good, that's it. This is the power that a god should have. In about a year, I'll be able to absorb the entire asteroid belt. By then, I'll only need a day to devour the entire planet. Next will be the sun, the galaxy, the star clusters, and even the entire universe. I'll become the only god in this world. At this moment, Dionysus had already placed all his attention on his path to becoming a god. The so-called demons and Li Anping were no longer in his mind. Just as he was completely immersed in the ecstasy of becoming a god, a cyan tunnel suddenly appeared in front of him. It was like a whirlpool in the sea. A man wrapped in cyan light appeared in front of him. Dionysus subconsciously launched an attack, wanting to capture this person who had suddenly appeared in front of him. The gravity spell was instantly activated, and 10 times the gravity was applied to the other party, but there was no reaction at all. Therefore, 10 times the gravity immediately became 100 times the gravity, but the other party still did not show any changes. Just as Dionysus was about to launch another attack, the other party spoke. A stream of consciousness bypassed Dionysus' layers of defense and entered his mind. Don't make such boring attempts. What's before you is just a message. Do you think you can attack messages? Dionysus said coldly. Who are you? An earthling? Or someone from the Mondo continent? Human? Why are you always so unimaginative? You're not the only creatures in this world. The cyan figure shrugged and said, I'm the tide of chaos, the spokesperson of chaos in the multiverse, one of the demonic gods of the land of white. The reason why I'm talking to you in my human form is that I think it'll be easier for you to accept this. I didn't expect that your first choice is still to attack, rather than communicate. Humans are really one of the crudest creatures in the entire universe. Of course, Dionysus did not know what the land of white and the so-called demonic gods represented. No one had given him any information in this regard. However, the other party gave him a very dangerous feeling. Dionysus said warily, Tide of chaos, why have you come to look for me? Don't be nervous. I'm a demon who hates violence and likes to communicate. Assimilating everything, destroying everything, or devouring everything like other demons doesn't have a sense of beauty. Chaos is the true essence of the multiverse. All the worlds will forever be in chaos. The so-called order is just a temporary stop between chaos and chaos. Dionysus said coldly, I'm not curious about your interests at all. Tell me why you've come here. Seeing that Dionysus did not let down his guard at all, and that the surrounding magical elements were gathering rapidly, preparing to launch the next wave of attacks, the tide of chaos smiled and said, I only have one goal in coming here, which is to create chaos. There's not much that can be done on Earth. That's why I've come here to look for you. It's impossible for you to defeat Li Anping purely through the conversion of mass and energy. However, with this, there be some interesting variables. Amidst chaos tide's laughter, he turned into countless streams of green light and disappeared. Dionysus, on the other hand, found a strange memory in his mind. At the next moment, his eyes were filled with ecstasy. Chapter 401. In a void space that traversed through countless universes, at the same time as the chaotic tides sent the information to Dionysus, an unprecedented war almost engulfed another universe. With every second, several 100 million planets and battleships kept on plunging. There were also countless planets that were set ablaze, and life forms were destroyed. Destructive powers that were like the Milky Way in the sky turned into various radiances, flashing in the nebula. Simultaneously, two terrifying consciousnesses appeared in the same galaxy one after another, clashing and getting entangled with each other incessantly. Ching, are you using that mysterious chaos theory of yours again? We should be occupying this universe instead of instigating a civil war among them and watching coldly as these ants engage in meaningless fights. No, I believe that the entire multivariate universe was born from a conscious thought, and the essence of consciousness is the amalgamation of endless chaos. Our existence isn't a coincidence. The universe won't change because of the thoughts of consciousness. Matter exists eternally. It's just that it keeps on moving and changing. Even we are merely a part of the multivariate universe. This war of yours has proven my theory. Both sides of the war will eventually turn into the dust of history, and the universe will continue to operate according to its laws. Huang, the success and failure this time around can't prove anything. While we're arguing, I've spread a few more seeds of chaos. One day, they'll prove my theory. At the next moment, the two consciousnesses stopped talking. They were like a tempest in the universe, sweeping through the entire galaxy and then suddenly disappearing. However, just the repercussions from the conversation between these two demonic gods across countless worlds were enough to bring about all sorts of disastrous consequences. As the two consciousnesses swept through, the fixed star in this galaxy was extinguished, and its exterior started to expand. When the pressure increased to a certain limit, it would gradually turn into a new white dwarf. All life forms in the entire galaxy would gradually die out after losing light and heat. Over 20 days later, in the study of the palace in Tianjing, Li Anping floated in midair with his eyes closed. Countless rays scanned his body, inspecting each and every particle in his body. The third stage of quantum computation. Changing the circulation process of each particle requires a tremendous amount of energy and computing ability, and it has to be maintained at all times. But with the simulation of the quantization process, I'll also be able to develop powers that I've never had before. According to my calculations, every 7 days, my strength will double. This speed can't be changed. Pure seclusion is already meaningless. The next moment, Li Anping opened his eyes, landed on the ground, and walked out of the door. In a month's time, simple warp gates had entered every household, and Li Anping's study was no exception. But this time, the space warp gate didn't activate. Li Anping was like a ghost as he stepped through the door and arrived outside the study. He took a deep breath and adjusted the oxygen content in the air to the most suitable proportion for human survival. It could effectively promote the blood circulation of the human brain and enhance the efficiency of human thinking. Looking up, the sun was shining brightly in the sky. There had been no rain on Earth for more than a month because the water circulation in the atmosphere had been handed over to nanomites. However, according to the recent voting results of the citizens, from next week onward, Li Anping would choose 3 days of rain every month. However, as each drop of rain was under Li Anping's control, they would not drip onto humans, nor would they form puddles or cause other negative effects. When each drop of rain came close to a human body, it would automatically move away from the side of the human body, landing directly into the city's drainage system or converging into the sea. If humans wanted to get drenched in the rain, they could only return home and take a shower in the shower room. As he appeared outside the door, Xiao Shuesu immediately stood up and said, "Your Majesty, do you need any arrangements?" Although the current Li Onping could send all information to any terminal on Earth with just a single thought, Xiao Shuesu still persisted with her old habits. She tried her best to stay close to Li Onping, waiting for his summons. "After the wedding, you'll become my wife. There's no need for you to do this." After Li Onping saw Xiao Shuesu's stubborn gaze, he did not continue speaking. It was just like how there would still be people who liked trains even after airplanes came into existence. After computer games came into existence, there would still be people who missed the arcade games. Humans were not machines. They liked the most efficient means, but they did not always like to use the most efficient means. Although Li Onping did not need Xiao Shuesu's care, her attitude still made his heart, which had been cold for a long time, feel a trace of warmth. Although he could already know everything he wanted to know on Earth just by relying on the transmission of information, he still chatted with Xiao Shuesu like an ordinary human. "Are Claudia and Anna here?" "Yes, Your Majesty. However, Miss Anna has been working overtime for the past few days and rarely stays in the palace." Over the past 20-odd days, Li Onping had been staying in the palace's study to study his body, and the changes in the world were getting greater and greater. Other than Li Onping's continuous optimization of the environment, with the popularization of warp gates, people's travel had become unprecedentedly simple, and the distance between Earth had been reduced once again. However, there was still a group of people who opposed Li Onping's modifications. They were called the World Green Organization. However, the members of this organization only called for people to return to nature, return to the streets, and maintain the original appearance of the city. Other than that, they did not have any radical ideas. Therefore, the Earth's government did not send people to ban them. However, with the popularization of warp gates and the various benefits brought about by the improvement of the environment, their supporters dwindled. There were even reports that the organization's upper echelons used warp gates to travel. Not only that, other than the warp gates, Li Onping also handed over all kinds of technological information he obtained from the Red Queen, as well as various theories and designs of various ultramodern facilities that he had spent a few minutes to organize to the Royal Academy of Sciences so that they could slowly promote them to the world. Today was the first time the mysterious web had entered the major warp gate stores on Earth. The mysterious web was an important means for Li Onping to develop the entire Earth in the future, so he could not help but focus his attention on the sales of the major stores. Tianjin, 25th Avenue. Since the wee hours of the morning, citizens had been lining up in front of the warp gate stores one after another. It looked just like how enthusiasts used to line up to buy mobile phones, games, or game consoles. However, unlike the past, where people would rush over one by one from the streets, this time the citizens all came out of the stores and walked to the end of the long line. This was because most people directly teleported from the warp gate at home to the store's warp gate and then came out of the store. Now, every store in Tianjin was directly funded by the government to install warp gates at their front doors. In order to cope with the first day of the mysterious web sales, the store employees directly opened all night. Because everyone came directly from the warp gates, it was very convenient. Therefore, the number of people lining up for the mysterious web far exceeded the number of people lining up for any product in the past. There were so many people that the warp gates were congested. The store had to temporarily increase the number of warp gates to solve this problem. At the same time, reporters from television stations also arrived and began interviewing the citizens in the line. "Hello, sir. May I ask, when did you start queuing?" "Oh, I went to bed at 6 last night and came here at 3 this morning. However, I didn't expect there to be so many people." "Then why did you come here so early to line up? Or is there something about the mysterious web that attracted you?" Naturally, different people had different answers to this question. A man wearing glasses said, I've seen the introduction of the mysterious web. It can analyze a human's brain waves and send signals to all electronic devices. It's not just warp gates. It can also control computers, televisions, hot water bottles, air conditioners, and almost everything in the house. This is simply an epic-making product. A middle-aged woman said, "The old people at home always make mistakes when inputting coordinates on the keyboard." I felt that the mysterious web was very convenient, so I came to take a look. I didn't expect there to be so many people. On the other side, a few girls said one after another, "This mysterious web was also invented by His Majesty Li Onping. We are here to support His Majesty. 1, 2, 3, long live His Majesty." These few girls were obviously Li Onping's female fans. A few hours later, the first person in the world to buy the mysterious web appeared. It was a martial artist from Baiwa. On his index finger, there was a silver-white ring without any patterns on it. Because the mysterious web had used a suspense method to advertise before, no one knew what the external equipment of the mysterious web looked like. It was only at this moment that the mystery was revealed. The martial artist wore the ring and walked toward a warp gate without entering any destination. He then disappeared in a blue light instead of going through the warp gate directly. The buyers on the street were in an uproar. However, they would only know what this meant after a long time. Chapter 402. While Li Onping was in seclusion on a magic planet, the base in the Umla Basin was also bustling with activity. As more and more Earth soldiers and engineering robots came here, a large number of factories and lathes were continuously manufactured. The streamlined and systematic manufacturing system of human civilization displayed unparalleled power. War vehicles, fighter jets, tanks, combat robots, transport ships, and other weapons of war were assembled and manufactured one after another. The huge war machines shocked the captives again and again, constantly crushing their fighting spirit. In the past half a month or so, perhaps because they had lost the unified command of Dionysus, although the 5 great empires and other small countries had sent many spies to search around the basin, they had not sent any troops. According to the confessions of the captured spies, the general staff judged that these countries were not united. Without the restraint of a powerful force like Dionysus, they had fallen into all kinds of internal strife before the war had even begun. In particular, 4 of the 5 great empires had lost their martial magisters. The capital of the Holy Roland Empire in the Umla Basin had been bombed, countless cities and towns were destroyed, and their martial magisters had defected to the enemy. It could be said that the empire had suffered a great loss. The upper leaders of the entire country had fallen into an endless struggle for power and profit, and the other 4 empires were also eyeing their weak old friends covetously. The Holy Roland Empire could be said to be truly in a precarious situation. It was good enough that they could send some spies to the Umla Basin to collect information. How could they have the time to continue fighting these silver demons? But this was obviously good news for the Earth, which could give them more time to assemble and build Earth's weapons. After all, the size of the portal was limited, and many powerful weapons could not be directly driven over. Otherwise, with the combat weapons that were far more advanced than this era, the last war would have ended much more easily. And just as the Earth army was constantly building one amazing weapon after another on the land of the magic planet, the captives, who were managed layer by layer, were also being militarized and trained by the Earth during this period. They were uniformly managed in groups of 10. 10 groups were a team, 10 teams were a squad, 10 squads were a battalion, and 10 battalions were a regiment. The leaders of each level were directly appointed by the Earth as native soldiers. Aida, who had previously been selected as the team leader, was now directly promoted to squad leader due to his outstanding performance during the training, replacing the previous squad leader who had opposed the training. Dozens of people were lying on the grass. They had just finished a 10-kilometer run and were all gasping for breath as if they were about to die. These silver demons actually tortured us like this. I'd rather go back and be a slave. The distance we've run is enough to circle around Riven. Are these silver demons crazy? Do they want us to run like this every day? What's the point of standing in line? It's meaningless. Listening to their complaints, AI didn't say anything. He just looked at the time, clapped his hands, and said, "Okay, it's time to rest." Next up is the forward step training. The 5 worst performers won't have dinner tonight. Hearing AI does words, the native soldiers who were lying on the ground complaining immediately stood up. Compared to the harsh training, they were much more relaxed. The food provided by Earth was very attractive to them. Even if it was just a custom-made snack box, it was still a delicacy that most of them had never been late to in their lives. And a series of running and line training. It was obvious that Earth was using military training on the captives in front of them. They naturally didn't expect these captives to have any results from their training. They just hoped that through such training, they could strengthen their discipline and obedience and help Earth rule the entire magic planet in the future. After all, these armies from the Middle Ages had poor military discipline. With AI as order, a group of people quickly stood up. Some of them looked at AI, who was in charge of commanding them, with contempt and resentment. This traitor, he actually helped those silver demons to torture us. Someone sneered, "He won't be arrogant for long." When the 5 Nations Coalition army arrives, once the silver demons are sent back to Hell's Gate, people like him are dead meat. What an idiot. He actually succumbed to the demons. On the side, Walt listened to the voices of his companions and silently lowered his head. No one knew what he was thinking, but since AI became the team leader, he didn't talk to him much. Obviously, in his heart, AI had become someone who might implicate him when the Empire settled accounts in the future. Under AI's command, everyone began to march forward. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. The tremor came from the depths of the Umla Basin, where a large number of metal buildings were. What's going on? Are the buildings of those evil demons going to collapse? Those metal buildings seemed to be shaking. 5 kilometers away from them, there was a huge complex of buildings that were completely made of metal and somewhat similar to a combination of a battleship and an aircraft carrier. When the Earthlings had just finished building the outer shell of this building, they had been mocked by the natives. The craftsmanship of these silver demons is very good, and the things they build are all very exquisite. But they actually built a huge ship in the basin, and it's a huge ship made of steel. I bet that this ship won't float, even if it's in a river. Maybe these silver demons like to make their buildings look like ships. But now, looking at the ground that was constantly shaking and the aircraft carrier that was slowly rising in the distance, they couldn't help but laugh. The natives who had once mocked these buildings could no longer laugh. This time, Bai Xinghe had ordered a total of 6 aircraft carriers to be built on Magic Planet. Their basic technology had all been obtained from the previous aircraft carrier of the King of Gods. Now, they had also combined the various epic-making technologies provided by Lianping. They had already been tested on Earth, but this time, Bai Xinghe had ordered them to be dismantled and sent to Magic Planet. These aircraft carriers were all powered by a vacuum, zero-point energy reactor, and an antimatter reactor. Every single one of them was over 1.5 kilometers in length and weighed 70,000 tons. There were over 100 cannons at the bottom of the hull, and they could carry 50 of the latest model of Thunderfighters. In a war within the atmosphere, such aircraft carriers were simply the ultimate weapons that were completely beyond the imagination of the Mundo continent, which was still in the Middle Ages. Moreover, things like flying had a special meaning to these civilizations with a lower level of technology. Not only did these 6 aircraft carriers have great tactical value, but they also had great strategic significance. This was because, in addition to their powerful destructive power, they were shocking enough to reduce the courage of most of the natives. Although the magic of the Mundo continent had been developed for thousands of years, it had always been focused on the exploration of the mages themselves. There were no flying castles or magic battleships that could compare to the weapons of the Earth's military. When the bottom of the 6 aircraft carriers spurted out plasma flames, and the hulls that were like small mountains flew hundreds of meters into the air, the captives who were still training, complaining, or helping with the construction of the base all looked at the spaceships in the sky in a daze, revealing an extremely shocked expression. One had to know that this world didn't even have airplanes. Yet, they saw the aircraft carriers directly. How is this possible? How can these steel ships fly? This is the power of the demons. The spies outside the basin were all attracted by the aircraft carriers in the sky. They all looked at the sky in shock. This was the first time a war weapon had landed on the Mundo continent. We have to immediately inform His Majesty that the demons are stronger than we thought. There are no magic waves. Who can tell me how these 6 airships can fly? Go back and tell the president that these demons have weapons that we don't know about. Bai Xinghe, who was standing in the control room of the aircraft carrier, looked at the shocked expressions of the captives on the screen and nodded in satisfaction. The biggest use of the aircraft carriers was to intimidate the natives. Letting the 6 aircraft carriers stay on a magic planet would greatly help Earth's rule. Thinking of this, Bai Xinghe pointed in the direction of the electronic map and ordered, "Activate the railguns. Give these natives a surprise." The spies more than 10 kilometers away did not know that they had become the targets of the aircraft carriers. The cannonballs shot out at a speed of 20 kilometers per second. The spies sent to investigate could not react at all. They were directly torn to pieces by the violent shock waves and the scattered shrapnel. And this was only the first cannonball. Each of the 6 aircraft carriers had 24 railguns. After a series of flashes and loud booms, a total of 6 locations where the spies were more than 10 kilometers away were drowned in huge explosions. The soaring flames directly covered the entire surface of the Earth. When the smoke gradually dispersed, only huge and ugly craters could be seen on the surface of the Earth. The loud boom of the cannonballs seemed to have brought the captives back to that terrifying war. They all looked at the aircraft carriers in the sky with fear and trepidation. At the same time, all the spies who were not attacked by the railguns quickly retreated from the Amara Basin. The silver demons rode steel dragons that could soar in the sky. Each steel dragon could spit out huge pieces of iron. Once these pieces of iron landed on the ground, they would cause shocking explosions. Countless similar intelligence reports were sent to the leaders of the 5 empires within a few days. Chapter 403. In the next 10 days, with the aircraft carriers in the sky as the vanguard, coupled with countless ground combat units, the entire Earth's army was like a hot knife through butter on the Mondo continent. In just 10 days, the entire Holy Roland continent had been captured. In the face of such super-advanced combat weapons, just the appearance of the 6 aircraft carriers was enough to make the native army lose half of their courage. The subsequent firepower bombardment made everyone, except for the magicians, unable to resist. As for the magicians, because they had teleportation portals, charm humans, and other magic related to space and illusion, apart from most of them dying under the artillery fire, there were always some magicians who could board the aircraft carriers and try to destroy these steel monsters. However, each of the 6 aircraft carriers was guarded by powerful ability users, such as Bai Xinghe, Xiao Laikong, Jing Guang, Yin Bei, Mephisto, Sibelius, and so on. To the magicians who broke into the aircraft carriers, each of them was like a nightmare. Moreover, the aircraft carriers themselves had powerful internal monitoring capabilities, with countless probes, infrared rays, heat sensors, sonar, and so on. In addition, there were lasers and gunpowder weapons inside. These magicians could be found and executed with methods that were far beyond their imagination. Compared to defeating the armies and magicians of the Middle Ages, what really wasted the Earth Army's time was taking over the occupied territories and countless captives. However, at this time, the captive army trained in the Umla Basin was very useful. Every time they arrived at a town, after defeating the local army, the Earth Army would kill or kidnap all the magicians, leaving behind some soldiers and captives to maintain the local administration. They also built a teleportation portal in the local area. Without the magicians, the Earth soldiers who had nano armor, particle guns, and high-frequency knives were simply not something that the ordinary people of the Mondo continent could fight against. Moreover, once something happened, the Earth Army located in various positions could rush over to support at any time through the teleportation portal. Therefore, they could only helplessly accept the rule of the other party. However, in addition to the threat of force, the food that the Earth government transported and distributed through the teleportation portal, coupled with the good military discipline of the Earth Army, were very good to stabilize the emotions of the locals. Wiseman Empire, capital of Kansasan. In the palace hall, King Wendell III threw the reporter's hand to the ground and shouted angrily, "A bunch of trash. A steel dragon that is bigger than a town? A battleship that can float in the sky? A giant steel bird that can fly in the sky and is bigger than a house? Every roar of the steel beast can cause a shocking explosion. This is your intelligence. Is this the information I got after losing more than 800 spies? Ridiculous. That's ridiculous. What I want to know is how many people there are on the other side. How did those silver demons defeat the sorcerer? Their weaknesses, what their weapons are, what they eat. Not these fairy tales, fantasies, and poems. Just as Wendell III flew into a rage, a white-haired magic shooter came out. As the most powerful sorcerer in the Wiseman Empire after the death of the Grand Magus Marshal and Wendell III's uncle, his words carried a lot of weight in the Empire. He quietly said, "Your Majesty, according to the intelligence, the entire Holy Roland Empire has been involved in the flames of war. The so-called steel beasts, if it were just a few pieces of intelligence, it might be doubtful. But since all the spies have received the same information, then we should accept this fact. The demons do have some kind of terrible power, perhaps a power that can rival magic." As soon as his words came out, it immediately caused an uproar in the hall. Although the continuous intelligence about the demons made all the nobles have to face the authenticity of this information seriously, and even the defeat of the 5 Grand Magus Marshals and the demigod's son Adam shocked them with the power of the demons. But this was the first time someone publicly said that the power of the demons could rival magic. This was simply disgraceful in the continent of Mondo, where magic had been supreme for thousands of years. Even Wendell III frowned. He was also a magic shooter, and in fact, all the kings of the continent of Mondo were mages. Naturally, he was unhappy to hear such words. "Sir Hyman, I beg to differ with your conclusion. The greatness of magic is indisputable. The defeat of the 5 Grand Magus Marshals is only temporary. We still have a Magus Legion, the Mage Guild, the Imperial Royal Mages, and the Templar Mages. In terms of group warfare, they are more important than the Grand Magus Marshals. The Holy Roland Empire has been caught in the flames of war. What we need to do now is to send troops to support them with the other countries. In the Cloud Courtyard, we need Sir Dionysus' guidance. We can't send troops at will. The other 3 powerful countries are still eyeing us covetously. What if they, although Hyman's words were shocking, it still didn't attract the attention of the nobles? The greatness of magic was too deeply ingrained. In addition, the continent of Mondo lacked the means to record images. They hadn't really seen the Earth's army, so it was hard for them to imagine the power of a modern army. Just when the whole hall was once again in a debate, a roar suddenly came from outside the palace. Countless thunderous roars came from the sky. The official of the Imperial Intelligence Department was startled and immediately shouted, "It's the sound of the iron birds controlled by the Silver Demon." Just when everyone was in a brief moment of surprise, a guard ran in, knelt in front of Wendell III, and shouted, "Your Majesty, there are 6 huge metal flying objects above the Imperial City." What? A few minutes later, Wendell III came to a tower in the palace with a group of ministers. They saw that the entire sky above the palace had been covered by huge shadows. 6 floating aircraft carriers quietly stopped hundreds of meters above their heads. Countless fighter jets and aircraft crossed the sky above the capital from time to time, circling around the 6 floating aircraft carriers, making bursts of sonic booms. Wendell III looked at the behemoths in the sky with an ashen face. At this moment, he finally knew what the intelligence written by the spies was about. And any king of a country would be in a bad mood if someone flew directly above their palace in an aircraft. The ministers at the side had looks of shock, surprise, and fear in their eyes. Even though there was no lack of magic shooters among them, the 6 floating aircraft carriers that were the size of small hills still gave them a huge sense of oppression. At this moment, a light flashed in front of them, and Bai Xinghe's holographic image appeared in front of them. "Hello, everyone. You must be the current king of wise men, Wendell III." Bai Xinghe looked at the ashen Wendell III in front of him and said calmly, "I'm the general of the heavenly army, Bai Xinghe. I'm here only because the God King is about to arrive on the Mondo continent. He will completely rule this land. You have 2 choices now, surrender or die." Because of Adam's propaganda, in the early days of the Mondo continent, all the local natives treated the Earth army as demons. This increased the unnecessary cost of Earth's rule. Therefore, in order to make it easier to rule the magic planet, the Earth army decided to promote Earth as the legendary god realm in the following battles, and Lianping would naturally be the god of the gods in the legends. In this medieval era, this kind of religious method of governance was obviously much more effective than purely using force to suppress or lure people with benefits. The floating aircraft carriers and various modern weapons at the Earth Army could easily make the locals believe that they came from the god realm. The success of this method will probably lead Earth to use a similar method when colonizing all the worlds with lower levels of civilization. "The god realm?" Wendell III said with a frown. "That's right. Adam blasphemed against the gods and was killed by the god king himself. Dionysus has also gone into hiding because he is afraid of the wrath of the gods. Now, King of Wise Men, this is your last chance to atone for your sins. Whether you choose to accept the guidance of the god realm or the wrath of the gods is entirely up to you." Wendell III looked at the floating battleships in the sky and then looked at Bai Xinghe in front of him. A hint of struggle flashed in his eyes. In the end, he roared, "Wise men will never yield, not even to the gods." As he spoke, a flame shot out from his fingertip and pierced through Bai Xinghe's holographic image in front of him. Bai Xinghe's holographic image flashed a few times as if the signal was bad. He sneered and disappeared completely. Following Wendell III's roar and attack, the ministers behind him and the soldiers on the tower all cheered. Countless magic preparations were needed. Siege crossbows engraved with magic spells were aimed at the floating aircraft carriers in the sky. In the command room of the aircraft carriers, Bai Xinghe looked at the palace under his feet and the people who were full of fighting spirit on the screen. He ordered coldly, "Begin Plan B." On each of the 6 floating aircraft carriers, 3 plasma cannons were aimed at Wendell III's position. Plasma, with a temperature of more than millions of degrees, drowned them completely. All the magic fields and protective barriers were torn apart by the high temperature in an instant. They cannot resist at all. As for the rest of the people who dodged by vaporizing, teleporting, or using spells such as scapegoating, they were targeted automatically by other railguns, electromagnetic cannons, particle cannons, high-energy lasers, and other weapons. The fire control system of the entire floating aircraft carrier was controlled by smart computers. With a reaction and performance that were far beyond that of human beings, the sorcerers did not have time to counterattack at all before they were blown into pieces by the continuous attacks. A few powerful sorcerers were not killed immediately. They charged directly at the floating aircraft carriers in the sky. However, before they could get within 100 meters of the aircraft carriers, they were torn into pieces by the fighter jets that swarmed over. In less than 10 seconds, the entire palace had turned into a sea of fire. The huge explosions and the unidentified flying objects in the sky caused a large-scale panic in the city. At this moment, Bai Xinghe's voice spread across the entire city through the loudspeakers of the aircraft carriers again. Wendell III has received divine punishment for blasphemy against the gods. From today onwards, the entire wise men will be guided by the gods. All those who are willing to be guided by the gods, kneel down. After 10 breaths, all those who are unwilling to be guided will bear the wrath of the gods. The next moment, all kinds of scanning devices had entered the location of everyone in the city into the computer. Countless cannons on the floating aircraft carriers were aimed downwards. A cruel massacre was about to begin. All those who were unwilling to kneel would be blown into pieces by the Gaussian machine guns precisely controlled by the computer. Those who were willing to surrender would escape and be managed by the army and captives from Earth. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.